Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dr. Denisha Keating Show. Super excited to have my very good friend Anna here. We are going to be talking about a pretty heavy topic, so it is a trigger warning. We're not going to be going into details of the sexual abuse or sexual assault, but we are going to be talking about the aftermath of sexual assault. So what we would like is just to put a complete warning, big flash warning, that if you're digging in, we hope that you learned something from this and that it is something that you can take away and take into your communities of how to support someone who has experienced this and help make them comfortable and safe in talking about their experience.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have you take it away.
Hello. Well, I'm Anna. Man, we've been friends for a long time.
Gosh, I don't even know.
I think we met in 2009.
It's been about, like 15 years.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Before Dane. Before my husband.
Dane. I'm like, before we all had it together, which we still don't feel like we have it together.
I don't have it together.
Surprise. Right. In your 30s, you think you'll have it together. You do not have it together.
And I'll be 40 at the end of next month, and I still don't have it together. So we're good.
I don't think together is a thing. It doesn't happen. Anyways.
No. We're constantly growing and learning every day, which is why this topic is so important to me.
Yes.
So just a little bit brief background for me. I was sexually assaulted a couple times, not by the same person. There wasn't a first occurrence, but when it started was probably when I was about 4 or 5. I couldn't tell you the age when that stopped. And then again with a close family friend from church who, and I think I was in 5th grade, so about 10, 11 years old. One thing that was never discussed in our house was sex. It was never brought up. It was one of those things that was hush hush. We didn't talk about it. You didn't talk about what happened to your body or any of that. So any of that stuff I learned at school or from friends.
Oh no.
You know, like when you have, what they call it, family life or whatever. And then there's all the questions, what's stuff, but I never felt like it was a safe place to ask those questions.
Right.
And as far as I understand, it wasn't hush hush in my mom's house. I don't know about my dad's. I never asked those questions to him, but my grandma has stories, and my mom was very much like, no, I don't want to talk about that. So, you never know what's going on in somebody else's past and stuff, and maybe one day I'll get
Let me ask this question, though, because I think sometimes when we think we don't talk about sex, did they even talk about body parts?
Not really.
So see, that's something that I just recently found out that we never use. I knew we didn't talk about sex, but we also never use oh, that's a penis, that's a vagina, that's your breast, that's your hand, that's your we didn't talk about it. So that is such a dangerous way to go. I feel with families is because then it's well, we don't even know a name to it. We don't talk about private parts is what we were always told. And so when the sexual abuse started happening on our side, it was that you don't know. We just don't talk about that. So what would be something that you would hope a parent would learn to because it's scary to talk about it with your kids. So what have you done so far to talk with your kids about it?
I have 2 kids. I have a 9-year-old and an almost 4-year-old. And I will say that as somebody who is still mentally healing and recovering from her childhood in that way, raising your kids, especially when they're 2 different genders, is hard because you love your kids dearly, but then you have these flashes in your head of what if? Okay, well, my husband's amazing about that and working through that's not going to happen. We have created a very open space with our kids, and I feel that's the number one thing. Yes. Your kids have to feel comfortable enough to come talk to you. Yeah. If you create this wall boundary, it's exactly. Harper, I know what you mean.
Harper gets it. She's wow. She's due to nap time. She's watching Spider-Man, but she is I went out. So you create the boundaries and you talk through with them.
And we've had instances of stuff where, and I have to work, and I am working with myself of not overreacting, because then you have that other gambit of it.
Yeah,
you go from one end to the other. And my son is a 9-year-old boy. Well, they think certain things are funny, and we'll laugh at burps and farts and all of that stuff. But they also think their body parts are funny too. And we had an instance where it was like, ha ha. And I'm like, no, we don't do that.
No. It's that little gif of the elephant being like I've seen people share it where they're like, boy moms understand this.
Yep.
Where it's the little baby elephant just like running around and you're just like, wow. And then you have a little boy do that and you're like, oh my God. Like,
and if you just have a house full of boys, it's like, yeah, whatever. They run around naked or whatever. Like in your home. Okay. When you have a daughter now.
Yes.
Okay, now I'm looking at this from completely different eyes. So we have to have those conversations where, okay, this is appropriate, this is not appropriate.
Yeah.
We should also not be doing this with other people.
Yeah.
Don't do this with your friends. It's not funny. Like, we keep those things to ourselves.
Okay, so does that, maybe not in your situation, but does it happen where because he is 9, I feel like that's the age of where a lot of kids start to find their bodies. Mm-hmm. Is it like, well, my friend did this, or do they not reveal? Does he not reveal that?
I ask, like, okay, where did you learn this from? Or is this something that you have done with your friends? And it's like, no, I just want to do it.
I just thought it was funny.
Okay.
Oh, I like that, like asking, like, hey, not like assuming it's from somewhere,
right?
But just be like, hey, like, why?
And I
what's
know
your thought process?
I know his friends, and I like where he has spent the night. I'm like, that I know that did not happen. So I'm always just like very careful with that, and just okay, not appropriate to do. Let's keep things covered and to ourselves.
Yeah.
And my kids know all of their body parts.
Yeah,
that's the other thing, is making sure we use correct names for things. And maybe if we're out in public, we use a different word for it. Like, dude, keep your junk covered or something. Like he thinks it's hilarious to call it that.
That's so funny. Especially for like little kids, they're just like, that's fun. I would
kids are very curious, and I think we also have to be very careful not to shame them.
Yeah,
because if we start falling into that realm of things where we automatically shame them for natural curiosity, that spikes to something else as well. If you feel like, oh, my body is something I need to be ashamed of, well, then now we have a different problem.
See, okay, so that happened a lot when I grew up, where it was like, and I've talked to my siblings about this, and I'm like, did you ever just feel shamed? Like, I remember, it's going to sound TMI. I just remember when we discovered that girls were different than boys. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, okay, we're looking in the mirror. We're trying to figure this out. Yeah. Like on the sink, like this is dangerous. like we're
Someone's
just
falling.
Looking and like, we're just like, wow. Like, and our ranges were very different. So we did have older kids in the home with younger kids in the home. And the older siblings, they're going to make fun of you and you're just like, ew, you're gross. But it was the parents where it was just like, you don't do that, and like attacked. And then like there were some things where it was brought into a spiritual side where it was just like, this is how the Lord hates this. And you're just kind of sitting back and you're like, I don't do this. I was curious about it. So what does that conversation look like for you? And then there's like a twofold, like as a parent, but also as someone who went through it. How, because you said you kind of, it's like, it's that juggling act where you're like, oof.
And so just recently, like this was in the last couple of weeks, I did a prayer counseling session. And it was actually one of the things that she brought up was talking about being able to look at myself in the mirror naked and not feel ashamed. And I was like, oh, whoa, I didn't even like think about that. And that's been really hard to process through. And I'm like, I think almost every parent has walked in on their kid doing something and you're just like, what are we doing? Especially if there's a mirror involved and they're like dancing in front of the mirror and stuff. And it is the curiosity of it. And it's, don't shame, but talk about it, right? As long as they're not doing anything questionable, it's like, okay, all right, let's just put some clothes on now and like, okay. But there is that natural God-given curiosity, like, okay, what is this? What am I? And also as females, like we need to be familiar to a point, right? We don't need to cross into the lines of masturbation and all that kind of stuff, because then that crosses a biblical line.
Right.
And then we're inviting things in that we don't want to invite in. Yeah. And when you go through sexual abuse, that stuff's already been invited into you. And then you'll find like anyone who's gone through sexual abuse of any kind, that spirit of perversion has been brought into your life. You didn't ask for it, but it was brought in. But then it leads to, I had such a hard time breaking and this is the first time I think I've admitted it to anybody, was a masturbation. It was this weird addiction that I had from a very young age. And it was also something I felt like I had to hide.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
But I just felt like I needed to do it. And I'm already talking to my husband, like, because I'm like, I'm not having that conversation with our son. That's your territory.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how to address something that I don't have.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know those physical feelings and emotions that go along with that. So we're getting into that preteen stage right now, and
it's terrifying.
It's terrifying in different ways, right?
Yeah.
At first, it's this weird transition of my child's no longer like a little kid, but they're not quite a teenager, and they're in that in between, and that in between is so fragile because you don't want them not to feel the feelings, but you don't want them to escalate too quickly. And you still want them to be little and innocent, but understanding that the world's coming up quickly, and how do we address these things? So we're constantly having open, honest conversations. My husband came from a very open family, which I found very strange because we just didn't.
It's very different. It's a very different approach because, like, we didn't talk about it, but there was sexual abuse running rampant for generations on both sides. And it was like I literally recently found out that I used to think it was around like 13 and I was like, I could stem it back to 8, thinking like questionable, like maybe it happened at 8. But recently, because of CPS involvement, I found out it was 2. And I like sat back in that and I was like, my daughter is 2.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how? Like you said you think it went all the way back to 4.
Yeah.
That you can remember.
That I recollect, yeah.
And then it's like it opens these doors to other things. And it's like you're curious about your body, but then you're shamed into the things. And then it's like, okay, well now I used to think something was wrong with me.
Yes.
And like you said, you walk into a room with this perversion, and I like as a young adult, I would walk in and be like, okay, that guy is obviously, you can tell, like something's up with him, that person over there, but oh, wonder what that person looks like naked. Like, wonder what they do when no one's looking. Like, and then it leads into curiosity and other things, but also like it's a shame on shame kind of thing. And it wasn't something we willingly stepped into.
Right.
So let's talk about that shame and like what you were saying is like, okay, you stepped into things at first it wasn't willing, you didn't have a name for it.
Right.
But when did you discover the name?
Probably like junior high.
Okay.
Because then you start diving a little bit more into all of the like repercussions of sex and like all these things in school and all of that. And then, junior hires and high schoolers, that's constantly on the brain.
Yeah.
And I feel even sadder for this generation now just because cell phones.
Yes. It's everywhere. It's like it's everywhere.
And that is where I'm so thankful that cell phones were not super popular until probably my sophomore and junior year in high school, but still not everyone had one until around senior year. So when I graduated, I didn't even have my own cell phone until after I graduated because I got tired of being left at work. So I'm like, all right, I need a cell phone so I can call my mom and not have to keep going back in to the mall and go call and
oh my gosh,
she forget to pick me up today.
Yeah.
But they have access to everything, and that's scary enough, especially when I have a 9-year-old already asking for a phone and I'm like, here's the deal, buddy. It's not necessary. You're not driving. I know all your friends' parents, and I'm trying to protect your heart.
Yeah.
And just knowing how much I was exposed to without social media and wide access to the internet and everything. I remember 3rd grade. I had a girlfriend who lived a couple blocks up from me, and growing up in my age and everything, we were latchkey kids. Meaning, if you don't know what that is,
I'm like, explain to the world.
You've got two working parents.
Yeah.
They're not home by the time you get off school. You live close enough, or you take the bus home and you've got your key to get in. So it was the rule. Like, once you get home, you call mom, let her know you're home. Okay, get your homework done. And then if I was going to go to a friend's house, that had to be done first. And any chores I had to be done. And then call, okay, I'm going to so-and-so's. And then when I got there, I had to call and say, okay, I got here okay. You know, and she lived 3 or 4 blocks up.
Yeah.
I think she was also latchkey. She was also the youngest of 3 and had 2 older siblings. And that was the first time I was exposed to porn. I'm like, you let your kids ramp it and whatever, and they're going to find a way to stuff.
The first time that I figured out, it was so sad. We lived across so the first time that we were all exposed to porn, we lived across the street from like a little mini market.
Okay.
And it had videos.
Oh,
and so they would let us rent videos. And we thought we grabbed Toy Story.
Oh, no.
And it was in the Toy Story case for Disney. It was not Toy Story. And I took it back and I was so angry. And he's like, oh my God. And I was like, God. I think I was like 9. 9 or 10. And there was like my older siblings and babies, and it was like we put it in and we were like, this isn't Toy Story. And then we're like, this is not Toy Story. Turn it off. And it was, you know, I know my upbringing was different. We didn't have parents checking in on us. It was just kind of like, oh, you're still here. Great.
Yeah.
You're alive. But there was moments what we did talk about was like, oh, don't get into anybody's van. Don't go with a man who has candy.
Yep.
If he says you
have
have
those conversations.
If you had a kitty or a puppy, don't follow them. But it wasn't the...
Yeah, we talked about
the
stranger danger.
Yeah, stranger danger. Like, I am good on that front. But the abuse came within. And it came from people we knew.
Yes.
And
that's usually what happens.
That is more common.
Yes.
So you talk about that shame. So what was that like when you did come out and say what was going on?
And unfortunately, I still have to have this conversation with my mom, and I haven't figured out how to have it with her yet.
Just have it on the episode.
Right?
Hello, Mom.
So with the first instance, I had confided in a couple, like some close friends, one other friend who unfortunately had gone through a very similar situation as me. I'm not going to obviously go into his stuff because that's his personal business, but we shared, like we were empathetic toward each other because we understood what that felt like. And because of one of the instances of one of the people that had abused him, this was 8th grade, all of a sudden all this stuff came out. And my mom picked me up from junior high that day, and she gets me in the car and she's like, I have to ask you a question. And I was like, okay. I knew something was up. And she asked me about this thing, and did this happen? And I got quiet for a minute and I said yes. And then of course she starts crying. And, you know, it was one of those things that needed to come out. And then I found out more information that I didn't know that involved somebody else. Again, not going to share because that's not my business to do so, but it was needed. And now the one thing about like good, it was all out. We were all talking about it, and I was already at a place because I loved this person, and like it was an underage thing. So it wasn't an adult and anything like that. And I was like, I love you. I forgive you. Like and now I've since had to like re-forgive and forgive myself within that too. Because you don't realize that forgiveness is never for that person. It's for yourself and your healing. But we are not called to withhold forgiveness from people.
Right. And
that's a really hard thing, because there are instances where it's like, how am I supposed to forgive that person? This is what they did to me. And I'm like, yeah, well, look at what Jesus did on the cross for us. And all of the sins that we've done in our lives and all of that. And it's like, it comes at different times for different people.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like I'm too easy to forgive, but at the same time, I feel like that's a God-given gift. I'm going to embrace it, because I'm like, okay, if God's giving me that, cool.
Yeah.
Forgiving myself has never been easy. But After that, it was not exactly handled well. It was like, okay, cool. We talked about it. We opened up. We cried. We did all the things and all of that.
Now be quiet.
Shh.
Yeah.
I didn't know if anyone in the family, like extended family, if anybody knew. There was no counseling brought up for anybody, no nothing. And that's where everything went wrong. And I don't blame my mom for that. I really don't, because I really don't think she knew how to handle it. And
right.
especially like that was what, late 90s.
Yes. That was how you handled it in the late 90s was
like talking about mental health and all that stuff now is very open and freeing and all of that. And that's fantastic. But it wasn't a thing back then.
No.
Like if you went to therapy or counseling, your marriage was either falling apart or you were crazy.
And it was still, you have to stick it out within the church. You still have to stick it out when you're being abused. Like you still have to, like that's what we heard all the time was like, even though, because the sexual abuse for us was like, it was in the family and it was an adult to a child. And it was, well, they just need therapy. They just need to work on it. They just need a God intervention. And it's like, no, that's not, like that person is not safe. You cannot, there is a difference between children exploring and someone who is actively attacking. Like children exploring is different, but someone who has learned and has groomed into that behavior to where it's like, no, okay, now they're putting themselves in situations to abuse people. That is a whole different ballgame. That is not something that we can just go, therapy worked, prayer worked, don't talk about it, but we're aware of it.
Yeah.
That is not, and that was what has happened to so many people during that time, that it was kind of like, I know for my grandparents, it was, everyone's been sexually abused. What about it?
I didn't really understand what it was, quite honestly, until I had met a couple other friends. And then one in particular was like, oh, yeah, I experienced that. My grandfather did. And I was like, whoa, what? Like,
yeah.
Oh, whoa, okay. And then, but it was you don't talk about it. So you didn't know these things. And that kind of comes back to, not that we've talked about it yet, but when we were going through infertility, I felt like I couldn't talk about it. And it was very lonely. And it's the same kind of thing, like trauma of any kind and hard times, no matter what, if you can't find a community or somebody to talk to, it's lonely, it's draining. You find yourself depressed, anxious, angry. You end up making very poor choices in life. Like I started turning down a path, and because of the connection I had with this friend. And what do we know about hurt people? Hurt people hurt people, right? And it's very much more of a domineering personality than I am. I was very much the doormat, people pleaser, like whatever I can do to make you happy.
And that's where people who are predators prey on these. My husband's always the one going, nah, it's all right. And so I don't have, so I'm thinking of his face right now. I'm like, is that right? They do look for the child who's usually the quiet one, usually the one who's withdrawn, usually the one who's not outgoing. But I've noticed it's, even though some people that I know who are extroverted, they're the ones who will keep the secret.
Right.
So they look for that one who's too afraid to make waves.
Right.
And that's the common thread that I'm like, you're extroverted, so how did you get sexually abused? You're like president of the United States, like how did you even go through like that kind of stuff? Like, because when we look at that and like, you know, someone of that stature comes out and says, yeah, I experienced some sort of abuse. It's like, how? I wouldn't have known that. And it was like, well, they knew I would stay quiet. And there's that shame and guilt that come in. And that like, I don't think that that's like the process of working through trauma. I think it's how people make it seem is that it's like, well, we're in this together.
Yeah.
We're doing something wrong together. It's not the person doing it.
Right. It's like you're included. You're almost included. Like you're the what's the phrase? Oh my gosh. Brain fart.
I love it. It's you're the like the person involved in it. Like you're oh my God, why can't we think of this? I'm Batman, you're Robin. Like you're the sidekick. Like you're
pretty
really
much. But you're in cahoots with this.
Yeah.
Like this isn't just me. You're a part of this too.
And you're not innocent in it.
Right.
Like, and you're just like, but like, what?
Guilty by association.
Yeah.
You know?
And, oh my gosh. That was the whole thing.
I think back to the shame thing. Part of that was, you know, like you said, like we talked about, okay, don't no stranger danger. Like, look out for certain things. You don't talk to people you don't know. If your mom and dad aren't there, don't go, like, don't take candy from people and all that. But, okay, what do you do in a situation like this where a grown man asks you to sit on his lap and all of that? Like, this isn't, and you don't feel, this is not okay. And, okay, how do you address that?
But they don't start out with that.
Right.
They start out with, just give me a hug. Just here's my hand. Let me touch your hair. That's how it starts. You know, give me kisses. And it's like, you don't kiss my kid. Like, you don't grab my kid.
I don't force my children to hug anybody.
Even us. And it's so hard because I'm like, I want a kiss. But I recognize that where I'm like, just give me a kiss. And I'm like, whoa. Because I'm teaching her that she can be pushed into this. She's very stubborn. She's very fine. She'll be okay. But she's like, no. And I'm like, okay.
My son is he's very empathetic, but he's a very emotional and to himself person at times. And even me, I don't always get like the front, like, squeezy hug from him. He's a side hugger, or he backs up. And it's one of those, like, not that he's a scared dog, but like where you have to let them come to you.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And so we've talked about, like, okay, you don't want to hug, that's fine. You do not have to. You should at least acknowledge with words, like hi, bye, whatever. Maybe give a high five or a fist bump, something like that. Yeah. That is fine. And if you're not comfortable with that, that's okay. But I do want you to at least verbally recognize this person when we're, like, coming into their home or whatever. And some friends, like, their kids have to hug everybody, and that's their family business. My kids, I refuse to make them hug anybody, because their kids also know, like, they have this sense, like, I'm not comfortable, I don't know you, I'm not going to just embrace you, and I'm not going to force that, family or not. No.
Yes. I want to say, and I understand that it's people's business, like, you can raise your family however you want, but what I want to say is just like a plug is like, look, groomers look for the families who it's like they attach themselves to the families who don't have firm boundaries. And that's the thing that I've recognized is, like, in my family, you were shamed for not giving hugs. You were then shamed for not giving kisses. And my family didn't hug the generation before that. So it was kind of like this whole thing that they were trying to really get affectionate, because they were just like, hey, we didn't get affection as kids. But that's where my dad thrived in his abuse, because it was, okay, you need to hug me. You need to sit on my lap. I'm your father. You need to listen to me. But that opened the door to other predators. Yeah. Where it wasn't just him that I experienced that with. It was then they learned that guilt would work really well with me, to where I was a people pleaser and really struggled with that it was even to a fault where it was like, oh, this is going to physically, emotionally, mentally damage me. But I'm still walking into this room out of fear, because you are somehow not wrong. Like, I lived in different places, too many places, and in one of them, the person I was renting a room from would literally come into my room and stand and watch me sleep, and was like, well, why did you leave your door unlocked? And I was like, oh my gosh, like, why are you in my room? And I felt bad for standing up for myself. So it was like that whole shame and guilt lives so much further than just that moment. And it's like
deep-rooted.
It's so bad. And this is why I would say, like, families, like, you need to have some sort of boundaries. Like, look, I get when your kid doesn't want to kiss and hug grandma and grandma's hurt by that. But honestly, like, fist bump, high five is just as good. Yeah. It really is. Like, did they say hello? I love you. Cool. This isn't like a, hey, I need you to eat your dinner because you haven't eaten in 3 days. This is just, I'm so sorry that your feelings got hurt because my kids have boundaries. If you didn't feel comfortable hugging someone, why would my kid be forced to do that when you would not do that yourself?
Right. Thankfully, I have very understanding in-laws. Like, if my kids say no, then they're fine.
My in-laws are the same way, and they've even been like, she's good, because I'm just like, oh, give her a hug. But I have cousins who have like kids and stuff, and they've said that they've struggled with that because some of their kids are really affectionate. So they have to teach the really affectionate ones. One of my nephews is the same way, where he's just like, I just want to kiss her. I just want to kiss Harper. She's just so cute. And I'm like, but she said no. Yeah. And that it's not that he needs to get shamed or in trouble. I was like, you're not in trouble. I'm just letting you know it's a boundary for her.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, and we worked on that in our house, is if someone says no or stop, you need to listen.
Have to,
And that goes for my daughter too. I'm all, your brother asked you to stop. You need to stop. And this girl, I love her. We call her Spicy because she is very, and I hope that she carries that with her. We're just trying to make sure that she uses it for good.
Yeah.
But we've had times where she will sucker punch her brother. And I'm like, you can't do that. That's not okay. And she will go like on and like go and attack him. And like, they're fine until
they're not fighting
she got below the belt. And it was like, girl, no, back off. But she will go toe to toe for him.
Yeah.
Like she loves her brother. And I'm like, good, cultivate this relationship. Yeah. Because we don't have, like, me and my siblings have a very weird relationship, which is understandable. My sister and I are just kind of learning how to be siblings.
Yeah.
And, you know, we always have good conversations and stuff. And she and I have really been developing our relationships with God. And I think in turn with that is where we've been able to kind of turn course with each other. But we're still learning these things.
Yeah. Is she older?
She is. So she's just shy of 5 years older than me.
Okay.
And my
so
brother's
there's the
just
big
shy
sister
of 7.
/ parent role that she probably felt that she needed to take.
Especially as the middle kid, right?
Yeah.
And I had learning disabilities growing up, and she was very good about stepping in and helping me with that.
Yeah.
And I'm forever thankful to her for that. But we didn't understand the dynamic of stuff. And she moved out at 17. And then from there is when we started not fighting anymore and like loving each other.
Yeah.
But it's been great watching her. She has 2 boys, and they're both fantastic human beings.
They're so tall now. I know. I was like,
crazy.
I have to tell you because I was like, where did the little ones go?
Yes.
It was like, I had to look up. I was very shocked.
They were taller than me, and I'm like,
I was very shocked because I was like, last time I saw them, I had to look down, and this time I was looking up, and my neck hurt, and I was like, wow, I have not recovered.
Yeah. But, you know, circling back to the shame thing, I think as a regular parent who's never had to deal with the sexual assault stuff, and praise God that you have not. But you still have to make sure that you are helping to set boundaries up for your kids to make sure that they understand. Learning red flags, and I feel like we'll talk about that in a little bit, of what to look for. I am very, very cautious and particular about who watches my children. If I get any kind of weird anything, no, you're not watching my kids. And I also let my kids be a part of that. More Emerson than Amelia because she doesn't understand all of that yet because she's only almost 4. But even with my son, like one of his friends was having a birthday party pretty much right after school. And I'm like, oh, I can't get you there. I'm at work. And I'm like, well, let me see if grandma can take you. I was like, however, so-and-so's mom said that she'd be happy to take you. And like the park's not far from the school. So I left it to him. I had already gotten the clear that like my mother-in-law was going to be okay to take him and be there. I'm not a mom who's comfortable just dropping my kid off.
No, you
except for like 2, 3 of his friends, because I know the moms really well and I'm comfortable with their family. But I left it up to him. I was like, okay, here are the options. So-and-so's mom can take you after school and you guys can all go together to the park, which is not far. It's just that one right there. Or grandma can come get you and she can take you and stay at the party. And he thought about it for a minute and he's like, I think I want grandma to take me. I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll let so-and-so's mom know that you'll be there, but that they won't be taking you.
I really like that because then he's involved in it too. Because then it's like, what if it may not be that he's like, oh my God, I think something's wrong with them, but it's just his comfortability is like maybe he's not feeling well that day, and he's like, I want to know someone familiar. Versus it being like, okay, now I don't feel good, and because I have felt that like when I don't feel good and I'm around people I don't really know. I freak out. Yeah. So it's like, if I'm an adult doing that, my poor child, like we have to make them feel comfortable. And I love that he gets to make that decision too, because then he's learning the awareness of like, what am I looking for in other people? Right. So when it comes to getting to know the families, because my parents use that phrase all the time. And we were the family that it was like, we looked good on the outside and inside it was like, oh my God, like I'm so sorry if anything ever happened, but like they would always use that phrase. Like, well, I don't know the family. I think it was a phrase they just threw around, but like, I don't know the family
in the 90s.
Yeah. Like, I don't know the family. I don't know their parents. Like, I don't have their number. And I was like, okay, how do you get to know the families to know that they are safe?
Right. So thankfully his best friend, So I actually went to school with his mom.
Okay.
Junior high and high school. We were in very different groups though. So we always say like God brought us into each other's lives at the exact right time.
Yes.
Because had we been brought together in those settings, it would not have gone well. I was not a popular person. I did not have a lot of money. So I was always in hand-me-downs and all that. I didn't really know how to do my hair or makeup. My sister wasn't living in the house, so I didn't have somebody there to do that. I was very much the typical tomboy. And I got made fun of. I wasn't very smart, though, because I was quiet. That was usually misunderstood, taken as, oh, she must be smart because she's quiet. Oh, not at all.
You're like, no, I'm struggling. I'm quiet because I'm struggling.
And I was actually, as a child, I was very extroverted. And then there was a shift probably around like 6th grade, and that's when the bullying and the getting picked on and stuff really kicked in by like very popular girls. And you know, that was just like, oh, okay, I am different. I am like this, that, and the other. So there was that whole thing. But so she and I got reconnected when the boys were born. They ended up born 3 days apart. She actually delivered at a different hospital, but she knew the nurse that was leading our mom's group. And so she had invited her to come and join. And it was one of the moms from church, actually, who had told me, this was really helpful for me after I had my daughter. I really think you should go. And I'm like, I don't have the money for that right now, because Dane was an apprentice, and we took a huge pay cut when he switched over into that when I was like 6 months pregnant with Emerson. And
I forgot that
he was only home. So I gave birth on a Thursday. He was home that day. They wanted him to go back to work Friday. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. So I gave birth on a Thursday, and then he was back work at Monday. Thankfully, I didn't have really postpartum with Emerson, so it was fine. But so I battled back and forth. She's like, I actually have a credit with the hospital, so I can like see if I can get that transferred to you. And then I think the difference was like $15. And I was like, okay, I think I can do that. So I show up, I walk in, but again, here's that guilty by association thing, because her friends in high school were not nice to me because she was in the popular group. I walk in, I see her, and I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And then like it was that sinking feeling. I'm like, oh, judgment,
this is where
shame,
we exit
all the things. And I'm like, ooh, hold baby.
Yeah, like,
and then all the realness came out. She's struggling like I am. And God bless her heart, because her son cried a lot. And I'm like, you know,
you're a real person. Like, you are going through it.
And nothing's more raw than seeing a mom, especially a brand new mom, when you are in the thick of it, and like all the tears, all the things, all the rawness, and everyone's just rallying around each other, you know? And so we started hanging out a lot more because of the kids. And then lo and behold, oh, she loves Disney too. And then there was that connection.
Right there.
And then next thing you know, like we're meeting up at Disney on Friday nights. And Emerson was at different childcare stuff until he was old enough to do preschool, and then he went to a Christian preschool, and then we ended up moving, and I was like, well, that one's a little too far to go to, so I switched him over to the one where his best friend was at, and then they were only in one of the classes together, but it was like that friendship developed. Yeah. So not only were they developing a friendship, but she and I were developing a friendship too, and they're also believers, so that just made it even better. And then one of his other buddies, I kept hearing this name over and over again, and I was like, okay. And then finally it was like, oh, that's so-and-so. Okay. And then I met his mom, and I was like, oh, I remember seeing her frequently, and that she was pregnant with their third at the time. And then, so then I would just like randomly talk with her. I was like, oh, hey, you know, like this, that, and the other. And then it was like, hey, I have a bunch of like baby stuff, like that whatever I hadn't given to you.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, we have this, like she's grown out of it now. Do you want it? And so then we started connecting that way. And then I found out they were believers too. And I was like, well, that helped. Like, it's easier for me to connect. Not that I'm not friends with non-believers, because I am. I have a lot of them. Some of my best friends are. And
it's just like you're adding extra things where it's like we get to talk about these commonalities.
Yeah.
And it's not a like, oh, okay, well, that's your belief. It's like, no, like we have the same beliefs here.
Yeah. And do not get me wrong. I don't think that just because you're a believer, you are a safe person. because those were the people who came after me.
Yes. And just because you know the Bible doesn't mean that you're actually saved. Like,
right.
It's the fruit that shows from it. And I mean, like, I have seen some people who have been the biggest abusers, and it could be just so many different types, that my father was one of them, where people loved him, adored him in public. He knew the Bible. He would teach people. He would bring them to Jesus. He would have those moments. And then behind closed doors, he was a monster. And it's just like, those people exist. So what are the red flags to watch out for?
Number one thing, especially as a mom, never ignore your gut. Now, I haven't had these conversations yet with my mom. Now that I feel like I've dealt with a lot of my stuff, I feel like now I can sit down and have this conversation with her and remind her, first of all, that I don't blame her. She had no idea. And the first person in my family that I told was my sister, and this was when I was pregnant with Emerson. She was going through some stuff, and we were both crying and talking about things, and then I was just like, I need to tell you something. And I told her about this person that I went to our church, and she was like, I knew it. I just knew there was something up with that guy. There was something up with that guy. And this was a grown-ass man who had 3 adult children. His oldest daughter had a son and was pregnant with a daughter. And then, like, I was like, and I just remember, like, after everything, I would always pray, like, God, let me have been the only one or the last one. And just praying that, like, he never did anything to his granddaughter or anything like that. And then I held that guilt. That's another thing.
That's a whole new guilt.
But I don't know if my mom ever felt anything. Like, this is a person who remodeled our kitchen. And this is another thing, like, if you see somebody who just seems to be doting a lot on your child, and maybe one in particular, I mean, granted my siblings were older, but this should be a red flag. So I think, and this may just be because of what happened, but I was somebody who didn't want to let go of her childhood. So 95, I think, was around when, like, American Girl really started to come out. And I was very excited. I loved all the books. I'm like, I wanted a Kirsten doll, and it was like Christmas that year. Our whole family, like, pitched in and got me her, and it was like the best Christmas ever. It was also like our poorest Christmas ever. Like, we each got one gift, and then, like, this was one of my favorite, like, stories to tell of, like, God's goodness, when like my mom was leaving for church Christmas morning to go to worship practice, opened the door, and there's this trash bag full of gifts on our step.
It was from me. No, I was kidding.
And I was just like, oh my gosh.
That is
like,
a God
it was
right
like
there.
one of the best Christmases ever. But
that's beautiful.
So he was a woodworker and made me stuff for my doll. And it, was like a kind of a give and take thing. But I didn't understand what was happening.
Yeah.
Because nothing ever, like, he was never naked in front of me or anything like that. It was like touching stuff. And it's just like,
it was the grooming aspect of what was going on. Yeah, and that's what it is.
I'll give you this, and then it's an
give me
expectation.
something.
And not knowing and not understanding that this isn't okay, again, where we need to have these conversations with our kids. They're not easy, but they're necessary. And also being age appropriate. I think that's the hardest part.
Yes.
Even in watching movies with my kids, everything goes over Amelia's head at this point. But even as simple as movie is, have you seen the movie Jack with Robin Williams?
Yeah.
So it was on Disney Plus. I was like, oh, I love this movie. So then we were talking about being kind and, like, how, people with differences and how we can, come alongside. And if you see somebody by themselves and, like, going and being that friend and stuff like that. Well, the kids at one point say something about, like, have you ever had a boner? And I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want to have this conversation right now. And
please don't listen. Please don't listen. Please don't listen.
He was a little distracted during that scene doing something else. And I'm like, thank you, God, I was not ready for this conversation.
But that stuff is also in the kids shows. And that was
especially
what I
from
think,
the 90s.
Especially 90s, but also, like, early 2000s. Like, I look back at, like, the biggest one that I remember was, like, Sweet Life with Zach and Cody, where they would say something, but they were young boys.
Yeah.
But in every one of these shows, you see the incompetent adult and then the child. But then there is always the one adult that is a little too much with the kids. And it's like, they're not the parent.
Right.
And it's like, oh, so now on TV we're showing, like, there you have your buddy, you have your adult buddy.
And there's nothing wrong with, like, an adult who invests in your child.
Right.
But you have to be
very aware of what's
aware, and you need to be using your best judgment and feelings, and ask your kids questions. Like, if you're comfortable enough with them to be around an adult who is not one of the parents, I would definitely say watch and observe how they are around your kid while you're there. How do they interact? What are the things that they're doing? Are they touchy? Are they
do they whisper
joking
to
and like in a certain way?
them?
Are they whispering to them? Like anything like that, that's automatically going to be a red flag.
Right.
Now, this was forever ago, so I don't remember if any of those things, like I don't recall him ever whispering to me or anything like that. But I'm pretty sure there was like a touching like here and there and stuff. And the worst part is I don't even think his wife knew what was happening. And she was the sweetest lady ever. And ask your kids questions like, how do you feel when you're around so-and-so? And we've also had the conversation of, if somebody tells you that you are not allowed to tell mom and dad something, you need to tell us.
That's like a big thing on social media right now, where it's like, I'll be your friend, you can message me, you don't have to tell anybody else. And it's like, red flag right there, because that is like, that person might be super genuine and being like, I want to be your friend, please, like, I'm here for you. But that is like 100% what groomers use, to where it's like, you might not want, like, you might feel afraid of telling your mom, but you can tell me, you can trust me. And it's these weird, like, I was following this lady, and one of the things that she did is she's like, I watch my kids' response when that person comes in the room, watch their eyes. Do their eyes light up?
Body language.
Or do their eyes panic?
And are they tense?
Are they tense? Do they change how they're behaving when this person is around? As they get older, are they changing how they're dressing? Because they're like, oh, is so-and-so, they specifically like, is so-and-so coming? And it's like, yeah, they'll be here. It's like, oh, cool. And then all of a sudden you're like, they're in a different outfit right now. Like, why did they completely change to like a complete one suit when they had pants on before?
Yeah.
Those are things like, as they get older, you can recognize, but even when they're younger, it is things like, and I know one of the biggest things was like wetting the bed, that those are the physical signs where you're like, oh, is your kid wet the bed? Does your kid panic when that person comes into the room? Do they run away? Do they hold onto you tight? Like when Harper is not comfortable, she holds onto my hand so tight.
It's a comfort thing.
And she's like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, but then when she's super comfortable, she's like, give me kisses. And I'm like, okay. And she tried to do that with my brother, and my brother was like, I'm not comfortable with that. And well, I was like, hey, if you're not, because I even told him, I was like, if you're not comfortable with her, because he was kind of like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And I was like, she's just really kissy. But if she just is trying, I think she's trying to say like, thank you.
Yeah.
And I said, if you're not comfortable with it, you can just say no, thank you. And they ended up doing like fist bumping, and then she started fist bumping with him. And I was like, see, like even an adult can be like, no.
When you come out of trauma, you have to be able to recognize that for yourself.
Yeah.
And let people know.
Yeah.
Never be ashamed of that. I think I've always felt like I could never have a voice. I was told to be quiet a lot of times, like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, and that was just with this, that, and the other, like anything. I was always felt like I was just being compressed down. And within the last year and a half, like I've really had, like, God's been saying, like, no, you need to speak. I gave you a voice. I've always loved to write since I was little. That was my outlet growing up, was to write poetry, anything. And it was just like, let me get it all out, because it was the only way I knew how to be safe in those moments and stuff. And I think I'd be really sad to read through some of my old stuff, but it was the way to get it out and just feel okay. But thinking about some of the things I've done, and I know I wrote it down, and I'm like, how can I use this? I don't think I want my kids reading it, but to just explain that I understand. And your kids will give off signals like you wouldn't believe if you're paying attention. And what are we all guilty of constantly, with always in our hand, our cell phones? Like, I found it so difficult to just sit and watch a movie with my kids without my device in my hand. And I'm like, well, okay, this has got to change, because they're noticing this. Yeah. Like, even my son will just be like, oh, can I have time on my Switch? I'm like, we're watching a movie right now. And next thing I know, I'm just like, okay, what did I just show him right now? Like, we're not able to just be present. And the more we're present, the more we pick up on the little things. And thankfully, like, we're in it right now with my son. He's very neurodivergent, and we're learning how to cope and work through. He's doing his therapy stuff, which is great, and it's helping me, and I'm seeing the fruits of it, and also teaching him how to pray, because prayer is our most powerful tool. And it's I tell him, I'm like, you know who's always going to be there for you? Jesus, God. And he, like, just talk to him, just have a conversation, because that was my constant all the time, was Christ. I knew that if I was alone or if I was going through it, like, I could just pray and cry, and like he was going to be there. And that was one of the things that my dad always told me, was just like, even when you think you're alone, just you're not. God's there to help you.
And it's hard, because it's like, I know someone's probably like going to listen and be like, wow, like my kid did go through the abuse, or I did go through the abuse, and like I wasn't heard. And when you said like, okay, maybe I'm the last person that it happened to, because I spoke up.
I didn't speak up, though. That was the thing with that person.
There was, I was very loud, but the whisper that came in was, or you are the loudest person to say, this is what you're looking for. And that's what you're doing right now. Because even if you didn't speak up then, there were reasons why. And those are not something that we need to shame or guilt ourselves in, like, to feel like, oh, well, we didn't do enough. Because I can guarantee you that you tried. But because there was no documentation of you trying, you're like, well, I wasn't loud enough. I didn't speak up enough. And I can guarantee you probably did try to tell somebody. And then it was like, oh, well, hold on. Let me not feel bad about this. Or let me not feel guilty. Or maybe I was shamed to be quiet. Like, oh, no, that he wouldn't do that. Like, we don't remember every conversation that we had. But if you were being watched differently, someone would have picked up on it and been like, oh. But also, if other parents were watching that same person, he wouldn't have had access to other children. And so it's like, if we didn't speak up, then I get that. But we can still be the loudest person. We don't need to put that person out there. We don't need to blast their names like people are doing on social media. And even so, if they're dead or not, like, we don't need to do all of that to save someone else from going through it. But we could sit with someone and just be like, I understand.
Well, and I think that's the biggest thing, is letting people know that you are heard, you're seen, because you don't feel like you are.
No.
It's not your fault.
You feel like you're seen, but in the wrong way.
Right.
Like, you're not.
Quite honestly, I always felt like, and I'm sure, like, I've heard this phrase so many other times, where you feel like you are sitting in the middle of a crowded room screaming at the top of your lungs, and no one is even looking at you.
But then you're all like outside, you're like, I'm okay.
And that was it. Like, and I think that's why I was very attracted to acting in theater, because I got to play somebody else.
Yes.
I got to be a different person, and I was all for it. I was like, I will do that, and I will do it well, and I will be loud, and I will be obnoxious, and I will be like, and all these things, because then I was somebody else. But I could never be Anna. I could never stand up to a friend who had hurt me and say, you can't talk to me that way. And these are things that I'm trying to teach my son now. I'm like, if somebody talks to you that way, you have every right to tell them, you are not allowed to talk to me that way.
Like, get behind me.
And if they're still acting up, then you need to go tell an adult.
Yeah.
And if no one does anything, you tell me, and I will come in and I will fight for you. I'm like, Mama Bear is real. And I'm like, I didn't understand how heated I could get physically with, not physically, but like verbally with somebody, until it was, okay, no. This isn't a my child issue. This is a you issue, and we're gonna do this right now.
And that's that. Like there, you said earlier, like that. Hurt people, but healed people heal people. And healed people make awareness happen to where it's like, hey, that's not the way to live.
Right.
And that is something that I think is so necessary and needed, because it's still today, even though we talk a lot about it, I don't think people know how to deal with it, especially within a church setting.
Yes.
Because when we start to get real, I'm going to say two different things, because I think we've both heard this. We've been in the same communities and then not in the same communities.
Yeah.
But we've talked about it, and it's all like, okay, well, let's go off to the side over here and talk about what you went through. And it's like, no, like, you realize there are other people in this room who probably experienced this. And I know so many times of sharing, there was someone who who told me once, and I was like, this was like a flag for me. Like, I was like, ooh, something is not hitting my gut correctly. But they said, I purposely start conversations off really, really deep so that someone will tell me their stuff to go deeper. So this person was like kind of leeching off of people's pain because they were just like, oh, I want something from you. I want to get to know you as fast as possible so that I could have things to use against you. And it was like a really weird thing where it was like, if someone is wanting to go too deep with you, and you leave that conversation, and I talked to Magda about this, and Magda's like, I have a saying, if I leave a conversation going, I shouldn't have said that, that is not someone I should continue to trust. And I was like, oh, like, hold on, say that again. And I was like, Magda, that is beautiful, because I had always like just left a conversation being like, oh, Denisha, you said too much. They're not going to like you. Oh, Denisha, that was too much trauma, because we can bond over our trauma.
Yeah.
And that's the danger, is like, you don't need someone pulling you off to the side. Just be in the moment, but also being very cautious of like, is this person, do they just see it as I walk in the room? Do they see labeled like, hey, you've been,
so
what do we do?
And this is stuff that I've been learning very recently, like, especially as your eyes are really open to what's happening, like within the spiritual realm, you start noticing things. And those who are not of the Father are able to see things. Because the enemy is a liar. He comes as an angel of light. He puts on this beautiful packaging on the outside until he's got you, and then his true self is revealed. And he will reveal things to people as a way to kill, steal, and destroy. What can I use? What can I take? What can I abuse? What can I, this, that, and the other. And so even in a church setting, just because somebody's there doesn't mean they have your best interest in mind. So you do have to be wary, but at the same time, use your best judgment always. Like, if something doesn't feel right, don't press in.
Yeah.
If you feel safe and you feel comfortable, allow things to just flow naturally, and they will. And you will have that give and take conversation. If all you're doing is this, and it's just like over and over and over again, there's not real connection there. That person doesn't really want, like, and not that they have something bad in the agenda for you later, but it's not a positive conversation. It's not going to be fruitful, and it's not going to help anybody. And then it's like you said, where you go leaving, you're like, what did I say? Oh my gosh, what did this? What did this? Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And then you're left feeling worse off than where you started. And then it's this whole repetitive cycle again of that trauma response. Because, and when you're still healing and processing, no matter how long it's been, you go into this weird victim place, and people can use that against you too, where they're like, you're just playing the victim card. And that also makes you start building walls.
Yeah.
Because, well, if everyone's just going to keep saying that you're just playing the victim card because you want something or this, that, and the other.
You just want attention. You just want someone to look at you. You just want the opportunity. Like, we hear it all the time.
Which is why I didn't share for so long, because I'm like, well, they're not going to let me like tell my story anyways, or it's just going to be blown off, brushed under the rug, and moved on to the next thing. And then you watch these other people with this boldness, and you're like, okay, hang on. They can say it. I can say it. I can put it out there, and I can help people heal too. Like, that's been on my heart for so long that I'm just like, I just want to come alongside, especially young girls and teen girls. And I know boys are just as affected by this as anybody else. And I almost feel like for them, it's even harder to speak up. But being able to come alongside these people, really regardless of age, but within the earlier you can get involved, the better, so that they don't go into adulthood with all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So that the healing starts sooner. But being able to come alongside them and just remind them that there's nothing wrong with you. There's very much something broken within that person, why they felt like they needed to do this, or they felt compelled, or felt like it was their duty, or whatever it was that was running through their heads, or whatever spirit had a hold on them to do these things.
Yeah.
And I do not feel like there's anybody outside the reach of God's grace. But that's also their journey, and they need to get to that place. But to be able to just have a hand with these people and just say, it's okay. I see you and I see your trauma and I'm here to help you. So let's work through this and talk through this. Share what you want. Don't share what you want. And then we'll just kind of let it all.
You don't even know that you already do this, though. Like, you've been doing this. Like, you were the first person that I actually was able to tell, like, this is what I've gone through. Because I had tried to tell a few people before, and I was told, like, hey, we don't talk about that here within the church. We don't talk about that as a leader. We don't let people know that we're broken. You know, go to counseling and figure it out in there, but don't bring it into the room. And it was so hard because it was like, look, like, so-and-so is being bold and being accepted for their boldness. I'm trying to be bold and I'm being told to be quiet.
Right.
And I was told multiple times, like, well, you're not healed enough to go forward. And I'm like, that's not true. God can use us in our broken, but I do believe that there is a difference of when we're walking through healing and being like, I'm recognizing to be cautious and share my story versus I'm still broken and sharing. When I'm broken and sharing, I'm just not as cautious of what I say versus when I'm in my healing being like, ooh, that could be taken that way and that's not the way I meant it.
Right.
But I watched as other people who were sharing and being bold, and I was like, okay, I can be vulnerable too. And I'd step into that and I would get pulled from leadership positions. I would be pulled into private conversations about how, you know, we didn't talk about that stuff. I was re-reported to the county for the stuff that I went through. Like, yeah, there's a letter from 2010 that they because of someone stepping in and being like, hey, we think that she has a valid point on this because the children are still with her dad. The county came back and was like, everything that's ever been reported against her dad is now null and void because they're just trying to get attention. Basically, is what the letter basically says. Everything that came before is officially unfounded. And because it was this person trying to do good, they weren't listening to what I was actually saying. And they made the situation so much worse. And when I found that in May of this year. And I was like, oh my God, that's why all of this happened. And that's why they didn't do X, Y, Z. And that's why this situation was so much worse. And that's why CPS stopped coming to the door and looking into the investigations. That's why they let this happen. And I sat back and I was like, sometimes there's people in churches and in communities that go, well, that person's okay to be bold because they know them versus me being bold and not really being known. People are like, we don't trust that. So how do we stay in boldness?
Right.
And be like, you know what, you're just not the table I get to sit at. Because that's the hardest part, to be like, but you are literally at the table I want to be at. You literally know my name. And you're still telling me I don't belong with this table.
Again, it's that crowd situation, right?
Yeah.
And it happens too often. And this is where I do feel like because the church is not just the building, right? Because the church is the whole body.
Yeah.
And if something in the body is broken, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to seek healing, find a way to fix it. And if the rest of the body is ignoring that one thing, it becomes septic. And then the toxin spreads. And from the different testimonies and stuff that I've been listening to, because I've been going down a rabbit hole of testimonies and people's boldness, and I'm like, they can be bold. I can do this. I can do this. Like, God's got me no matter what. Like, got this. And you hear a lot of the church hurt. And I will say that's where I've been very happy with our church lately. Like, they've been working really hard to fix that.
Yes.
And there's no such thing as a perfect church.
No.
So if you're looking for one, I'm sorry. It doesn't exist.
Where there are people, there are problems. And where there is people with problems, there is hurt. But it should not be something that we ignore.
Correct.
And that's where I think a lot of people have been like, yeah, we're broken. And it's fine.
And, I've been very honest with our pastor. There's been several times where I was very ready to leave because of her. And then God finally revealed, and he was like, okay, here's the thing. You could leave and you can go to a different church. And in that space, you're going to find more hurt. And it's going to keep happening. Because we live in a world with free will that that God gave us and that we don't always use for good. And so what can I do in the space that I'm in? Because I love our church. I love our pastor because of his passion and his the way he sees people.
Yes.
And it's really hard. Like once you find that, it's like you hold on to that.
Yeah.
And this is where I met my husband when I didn't think I was ever going to get married. And there's a whole other piece of that too. And then this is where, like, Kev married us. And then Kev dedicated our son.
Shout out, Kev.
Right? And then Kev dedicated our daughter. And then Kev just baptized my son. Like, there is a whole thing there. And I'm like, am I willing to give all of this up because of hurt-filled situations? Or am I going to remember that I am just as much a broken person as the rest of us, and just allow God to lead where I'm going to go next with this?
Yeah.
So last October when he told me you're going to speak, and I laughed because I was like, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to talk to people. No one wants to hear what I have to say.
False. But continue.
And then God's like, are you going to listen to me? And then I finally started getting in the Word every morning. I was like, oh, this is great. Unfortunately, I have not been great about that since I got sick earlier this year and then fell out of my rhythm, and then I've been slowly trying to get back to it. But then all of a sudden it was this, because I always go down a rabbit hole on YouTube. I'm sure everybody does.
Yeah, because normally it's like cats and candy, but those testimonies, I'm like, ooh.
With anybody who has ADHD, you understand that multitasking is how you get things done.
Yeah.
You can't do one thing at a time because then your brain's doing this. And there's 3 of us so far in our house who have ADHD. So...
Okay, I have to pause because I heard that wrong in my head. And I was like, that makes sense. I thought you said there's 3 of us internally. And I was like, I get that. Like,
no, there's more than 3.
That is... and then I was like, 3 of us in the house. No. See, that's how my brain works. Where it's just like, an enter in thing they did not say. And so half the time I'm like,
it feels like that,
what did they say?
It feels like there's multiple people doing different things.
And that it's I don't have ADHD. I have dyslexia, and that's very
actually part of ADD.
To ADHD.
No, it's part of it.
It is
because I have it.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yes.
I don't know if I have ADHD. I probably do.
It's a form of it.
It's fine. I've been thriving.
It's harder to diagnose in women than it is in men.
Heck yeah, I would not be surprised because I have little tendencies where I'm like, maybe I did or do have it, but it's very
This is where you're finding a lot of adults are realizing now that they have it.
Yeah.
Like, so you have adult diagnosis
disability. Yeah.
Honestly, and so if you haven't heard of it, there is a song, look it up on YouTube. It's called ADHD is Awesome. And I cried when I heard it because I was thinking of my boy. And
then you were like, and
I was like, this is true. This is for me too. But, you know, so your brain's doing a million different things. So at work, thankfully I'm allowed to do this. Like, I'll always have an ear pod in, and then I'm listening to a show or something. So for a while I was feeding myself with the wrong things.
Yes.
So it was a lot of, and it was really, I love storytellers.
Yeah.
And so I was listening to this like thing that's called like the Mr. Ballin podcast, and it's like The Strange, Dark, and Mysterious. And it all started with the places people should go and they did anyways, and shouldn't go and they did anyways. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I was like, I'd feel anxious and stuff so much afterwards. I'm like, I'm feeding myself with the wrong things.
Yeah.
And then after,
I do that with music sometimes where it's that same, like I start to feel anxious and really off. And that's where I'm like, I always have worship music playing.
Yeah.
And Spotify literally was like, you had like an insane amount of minutes played. And Jimmy was like, or one of our other pastors at church was just like, how did you even get to that number? Because that's not humanly possible. I'm like, it's playing 24/7 because the way that my brain works is like, I will watch a movie about race car drivers and I'll leave and I'm like, let's go, let's be a race car driver. And it's not good.
Right.
So I'm like, music, calm down.
Yeah.
So maybe it is.
So finally, like, and it partly because of friends and their big change over the last year and a half too, and like they're like, oh, you have to watch this testimony, it was so good. And then they would start popping up in my feed.
Oh yeah.
And I was like,
algorithm, I love it.
Oh, that looks interesting, let's listen to this person. And then so I'm listening to these people as I'm doing my tasks and stuff and being asked a million other things while I work, because that's what happens, because I still can't get over the fact that I'm not the admin anymore. It's okay. And I'm just listening to all these different people talk and like all of their boldness and all of this stuff. And I'm like, all right, God's showing you these people for a reason and reminding you that you have a story and it matters.
Heck yeah.
And I think that's when you go through stuff, you are either going to go, I guess really there's more than 2 paths. So you have the one path where you're going to completely ignore it, or you let it eat at you, and it takes you down this very dark and dangerous road. Mm-hmm. And you see a lot of people go down this road because you want to do something about the hurt.
Yeah.
So you mask it in different ways. Either becoming an overly people pleaser, drugs, alcohol, sex,
success, money, gambling, drinking,
all the things, right?
Drugs.
Anything that's going to be not honoring of God, because you just want to do anything you can to cover this up, bury it as much as you can, shove it as far deep down as possible so that you don't have to deal with it, but you're constantly reliving it. You can't escape it. You can't run from it. It's attached to you wherever you go.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, you're severely depressed. You're anxious about everything. You're worried. You have so much fear. You don't sleep. I can't tell you the last time I actually like fully slept. And this is like one of the things I'm still working through right now is, okay, God, can we deal with this? Because ever since I was a kid, like if you couldn't find me, I was sleeping somewhere because I don't sleep. I don't sleep well. And I was very depressed growing up. I don't know if my mom noticed or if she just didn't know how to deal with it. I was also told that anytime I was made fun of or put down or anything, that I was just supposed to let it roll off my back and ignore it.
Not true. Sticks and stones don't break our bones, and words don't hurt. I hate that saying. Like, words, I'm like, it really hurt.
Words have power.
And words will, if we listen to them, it will determine where we go.
They are like, they are seeds, right? Because like we're supposed to plant seeds, but not those kinds of seeds.
Okay, so you're talking about seeds, and this brings me to trees. I might actually have ADHD or ADD. I'm pretty sure I do.
I'm almost positive you do.
But it goes into my tangent. So there was kids who did a study on speaking kindly or ugly things in front of trees. So they put them in 2 different rooms.
Yeah.
The tree that had things, just ugly things like being mean to each other in front of this tree, it died. The tree that had kind things spoken to it thrived. Then they were like, okay, now let's just make sure it wasn't like the wrong light, the wrong room, the wrong that. So then they started speaking kindly to the tree, and the tree went back and was alive. Like, I was like, holy crap, like, wow, this is the seeds that we plant at a very young age into children. And so it's like, no kidding you were depressed as a kid. No kidding that you were like, okay, now these words are hurting me and I'm going to believe it and go down this destructive way. Yeah.
I only ever tried to commit suicide once. And thankfully it was during a time where I was in counseling. Okay. So when I turned 22, I was given a trust. It was from my grandfather. He left all the grandkids a trust. And that's where it was like the perk of being the youngest on that side of the family, because it was in the account longer. But I also wasn't taught how to be financially responsible. So that money did unfortunately go. Thankfully, I wasn't ridiculous about it though. I did spend it on therapy because that was finally at a point where I was like, if I don't do something about this, I'm never going to have a successful relationship. Again, back to the trauma, right? We make really poor choices. But I think it was when I had my wisdom, I had a really bad infection or something in my mouth, and then I had they had pulled the tooth, and there was a really bad infection, and I didn't know about it until like I got home, and then everything wore off, and I just wanted to claw my face off because it hurt so bad. And so my mom called the dentist, and they prescribed me Vicodin. So it was the first time I ever had Vicodin.
Oh.
And
Vicodin is very strong.
And so, I mean, I've always taken my medication as prescribed. Like, I've never been like pill popper or anything like that. But I had a really bad night one night, and I had like a handful of my Vicodins, and I was texting a couple of friends. One of the one that shared like the trauma experience, obviously not the same one, and then a different friend, and was basically like, the cliffs look great right now. And it was definitely the Holy Spirit who stopped me at that point. I mean, I think I took 2, but I like put the rest back in the bottle. But I remember talking to my counselor at the time, and she was like, what do you think stopped you? And I was like, honestly, I think the only thing that stopped me was God. That's it. But that level of depression was like there. And sadly, we don't understand how a lot of that kind of stuff is like, it's not just your feelings, emotions, and mental health and stuff. These are attached to spirits. Spirit of fear, spirit of anxiety, spirit of depression. Like, these are all spirits who have attached themselves to you. And when we don't deal with them and get the breakthrough and break free from these things, it does become generational.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that was already attached on me from the day I was born and then just magnified as I went on. Because I know my dad dealt with stuff. He came from a broken family, but he was like, he came to Christ at, I think, what did he said? 17 or 18. Like, he said Billy Graham with his spiritual father. I love when my dad talks about like he had a rough with like the way his family dynamic was and stuff like that. And we always said like my dad's side of the family was like the crazy fun side. But what's usually behind the crazy fun side? Brokenness.
All the crazy. More crazy and brokenness.
It's sad. I was like, but they were also the most loving and understanding relatives ever. But all of that stuff was still there. Well, I already see the depression in my son. And I'm not saying that to attach that to him. We're working to break him free from that. And also giving him a name for these feelings. Yeah. And I think that was the other thing, like it was just never taught growing up, was teaching your kids how to understand what they're feeling and what the name of that feeling is.
And that there are levels, because that's also like with healing, there's levels of why, like, I think I used to believe like if you were in counseling long periods of time, like years at a time, you weren't doing something right. And I was like, well,
peeling the onion.
Hold there's a massive onion. And a counselor was like, well, healing is like an onion, that if you try to like shred it, like you can't do that. Well, like orange, you peel it and it comes off pretty nicely. Yeah. An onion, you start to do that and it gets really messy. That's why you need a knife. And I was like, ooh, like hold the phone. Do you remember Dupre? Yeah. She's friends with Valerie. So she said that to me and I was like, that's shocking. But healing, when it's generational, there is a study that actually says it takes 5 generations to break a generational trauma that has happened. 5 generations. So when you go to try to pivot from what your family has done, good, bad, whatever, you're pivoting and you're saying, we're going to heal this generational thing that goes 3 generations back. You're actually trying to change the course for not just you, 5 generations down. Yeah. And that's why it doesn't feel pretty. Right. That's why Satan's like, what the heck? And there was something that you said that it reminded me of something that I heard God whisper earlier this year, is it was like, that's why Satan goes at children. Is because it's easy to when you don't know the language of what the hurts are, you don't know that there's multiple emotions. We usually just say, I'm sad, angry, and mad. I'm upset. Like, okay, I'm depressed. What does that mean? Are you melancholy? Are you just sitting there and like feeling really weighted down? Like, what is that? And that I think is crazy to me, because I was always like, I'm sad and mad. That's 2 feelings that I feel. And my body was responding in that it couldn't even, I was literally to a point last year where I could not feel, I would always feel anxiety and panic when I was excited. I would go on Little Mermaid at Disneyland and panic immediately. Interesting. Because I was like, oh, I'm excited. Panic attack. Because my body's like, what are we doing? We're panicking. And I'm like, why are you doing this to me? And my therapist has been really walking me through, and she goes, Denisha, your body has been in fight and flight for so long. It's been in trauma for so long that your body just goes, oh, that feeling is, my brain is associating it to panic. Yeah. And so now I have to relearn, peel that onion back, keep digging, and go, I'm not just changing the 5 generations after me. And Harper still matters. What I'm doing now still matters for her. Yes. She's still going to deal with that stuff. Yeah. But it's not going to be as much, because I'm going to start being able to pass what I'm learning down. So she's not having to start at 30 being like, what is this feeling that I'm feeling? Why am I sitting here in depression?
It is one of the most heartbreaking things in the world when you see the broken from you is inside of your child. The first time I heard him self-talk himself down. I was so hurt. And it was like God was revealing, this is you. This is how you talk to yourself. And I have been working very hard to make sure that I don't talk myself down in front of my kids because I don't want them thinking that they should do that. And, you know, we don't use like stupid or anything like that. And he will just be like, I'm so stupid. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. No. If we fail at something the first time, does that mean that we're dumb? No, not at all. It just means we have opportunity to try again and to learn. Okay, what did we learn from the failure part of it? Okay, when I tried to do it this way, it did not work. Okay, let's shift that a little bit. What if we tried it like this? The other thing that is really hard is not escalating with your child. So
I'm a 0 to 100 sometimes, and I'm like, woo.
My children have never been in a scary, I am not a physical, no.
Yeah.
I was spanked as a kid, but that was the norm.
Yeah.
Everybody got
if you didn't get spanked, it wasn't done right. I was kidding. That's not true, actually.
But verbally, I have to be very careful because I escalate. I'm like, you're not hearing me. And when I feel like I'm not being heard, I'm doing this because I wasn't heard growing up. And I couldn't feel like I was able to voice properly.
Yeah.
So when I was in it as a kid, I would blow up. I remember this one instance in particular. My siblings were driving me nuts. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I had this little stained glass thing that I had hanging on my door, and I was so mad. I slammed the door, and then it just shattered. And then I was on the floor crying, and then there's glass everywhere, and it's a carpet and all of this stuff. And I was just so mad. And it took me a while to calm down. And I remember, my mom would get all pent up, and then she would explode at us and stuff, verbally. And I told Dana, I was like, if you notice these things, if you're home and you see these things, I need you to tag me out. And I think that's the other big thing is when you're still healing from that, it's you have to be very open and honest with your spouse.
Yeah.
And letting them understand where you're coming from, because they are not mind readers.
No, but our children are not either, and that's hard.
And so as the other adult in the house, hey, if you're noticing this, please, I need you to bring it to my attention so that I stop it, or tag me out when he's not home and those instances happen, and I'm just crumbling to the floor on the kitchen crying. And then I got the other kid who's now shut down, because what do we do in those moments?
Yeah.
That's what our brain does. It's a self-defense mechanism. It shuts down.
Yeah.
That's why I've always explained, I was you can't yell at him. And I always have to remind myself that you can't yell, because yelling
it overstimulates the brain.
Yeah.
And the brain just goes, I can't function under this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zone out. Normally and it's crazy to me, because a lot of parents will be like, well, yeah, but they're still doing what I'm telling them not to do. They're still doing this because what they're doing is they're hyper focused on what's in front of them. And they're just I'm just going to keep trying to do this. And you're just yelling. And I'm your brain can't function when you're yelling, especially if that's a trigger for you. Some people love that. And I'm yeah, you're weird. Don't like that.
That's something else.
But that's something that I think that is why the emotions movies have been so they made $1 billion in this last emotion movie.
Right.
Because it's adults are going to this movie going, I have never understood my emotion before, and now I have words for it as an adult.
But watching the panic attack was a little much.
Yes.
And I worried about Emerson watching that. Now, and I did watch somebody who was talking about how they did not feel like it was a good idea for Christians, because they felt like it was glorifying those emotions, because God has not given us a spirit of fear, anxiousness, timidity, like all of those things. He's given us a spirit of peace and all of that. But because of the world that we live in, we also need to be able to recognize it.
Yeah.
And so what I've been working on with Emerson, and this is you don't realize, when you're trying to help your child heal, it's helping you heal too. And this is why I am very glad that he always feels comfortable enough to come talk to me about stuff. And I will say this, no matter what, if I am in the wrong, I apologize. And I've always been that way. I'm the first to apologize. But I want my kids to understand that mom's going to mess up. And it doesn't mean I don't love you. And I want to explain what happened.
Yeah.
So when we're both calmed down enough, we will sit down and have a conversation and be like, Mom should not have yelled. That was not okay for me to do that. Let me explain why it got to that point. And then let's root cause this a little bit. Like, this is what was happening, and then this happened, and then we're both doing this, and then our brains can't control it, and then everything just explodes.
But it takes you doing it on both sides, not because that my parents used to do that, and it was a shame thing. Well, I wouldn't have yelled if you didn't do this. And it's like, that's not helpful.
No.
So what you have to do is like, I felt overwhelmed. This is something I'm learning in counseling, y'all.
Yeah.
Like, I would go and be like, well, you did this. Like, I come in, like, my therapist is like, girl, when you're emotionally, sometimes you're a bull in a china shop. And I was like, I just thought I took a bat to everything. She's like, no, you are a straight up bull. Like, you're just like, I'm fine. No, I'm not. And I was like, that helps me though, because it's a visual for me. But I had to be able to say, like, the reason this hurt me was because this is how I felt.
Yeah.
But that person's going to respond and go, but that wasn't what I was trying to do. And you have to say, I understand that.
Right.
And even if you don't, even if you have to be like, you know what, I'm hearing what you say. And I am so bad at that. And that is something that has been really hard, because it's like, I have to go to Mark so many times and I'm like, I am sorry that I did that. But I can't go to a place of apology until I'm actually sorry for it.
Right.
Because I got to a point where I'm like, well, I'm not apologizing like a 2-year-old. And I was like,
well, because you have to mentally like calm down.
Yes.
You have to level out again.
Filter through what happened.
And a lot of times I'll be like, all right, I need you to go take a shower. And then like he'll go and then like settle down. Because sometimes that's the only thing that can get him to calm down. Yeah. Because when he is just in it, and again, it's heartbreaking. I had to take videos so I could show his therapist so that she knew like what we were dealing with. So then they know how to address their next session and stuff. And then I'm like, we've tried the grounding, and then it makes it worse. Yeah. And then I'll hug him and he's still like, and I'm like, all right, we're going to go take a shower.
Yeah.
Like get the hot water going and everything. I was like, after you're done, come down and then like we'll talk through this. But that was one thing I wanted to make sure that I changed in our house was apologizing.
Yeah.
It was never done in our house ever. And I felt like it was like God's grace thing, like with me apologizing to people. And I've been told like, you don't have to apologize for that. And I was like, hold on though, because there's two sides to everything. Like even how I was addressing an employee yesterday over something, like I was very angry about the situation. And I afterwards felt like I was like, man, I hope he didn't feel like I was belittling him in this, because I think it could have very easily have looked like that. And I was just trying to get my point across, but I could have handled that better. And like I said, like I'm usually the first one to apologize, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I did not handle that well.
And they're like, most of the time people are like, oh, I didn't notice, I didn't take it that way. But it's like, no, but you need to let me.
Right.
Because if you leave feeling a situation being like, I need to apologize for this, go apologize. Because it is also healing to be like, hey, this is a safe person that they can help me work on this too. Because that's really what it's about, is that you're not just apologizing to be like, yeah, I apologize. That's not what you're apologizing for. You're apologizing because you're just like, that's not what I wanted it to be. And I felt like that's what I left leaving it as. Yeah. And then they know you're aware, because then they could also be like, hey, you're kind of like, are you doing okay? Yeah. Do we need to take a moment here?
And that, I feel like going back with like the trauma stuff, like people need to be very careful how they interject with those who have gone through this stuff, because I'm somebody who's very apologetic, and now you're telling me you don't need to apologize, you don't owe anybody anything, and then you get this big head about that. You're right. No, I've been wronged. I don't have to apologize to anybody for anything. Like I have every right to feel this way. You may have a right to it, but again, it doesn't mean you should do that.
And we need to humble our butts.
There's like, what is that quote from Jurassic Park, what he's like,
I was like, I'm reading your mind.
Which one? You have the knowledge, you have all the stuff to do it, but you never stop to think, should I do this?
Because that's when he's creating the dinosaurs, right?
Well, and he's like,
but after he created them, and then it's all a mess.
When they're all like at like doing this stuff, and he's like, okay, well, you took the information from other people and all this stuff, but you never stopped to think if you should do this.
Yeah.
Because you're not thinking about the consequences afterwards. Because we don't, as humans, we don't think that far ahead.
Well, and we have lied to ourselves. So a lot of people may not know is that I do have a very big psychology background. That's like most of my degrees are in. And one of the things that I consistently hear right now, which is false, is that we are naturally good people. The Bible says that. Else the Bible doesn't say that. The psychology also doesn't say that. We are naturally prone to behavior that is not good. Like if you were to put us in the wild, we're not going to naturally know how to be good. We're actually going to adapt to the surrounding that we have, which is why like you hear stories about like the boy who got lost in the jungle and now he acts like a wolf. Is because you adapt to what you are in. We adapt to our environment.
Right.
And if we want to be a kind person, we want to be someone who's going to help our kids in this. If we want to change generations, we have to be the person to say, you know what, this is what I'm going to do to humble myself versus, like you said, get a big head about it.
Yeah.
Because I literally got into that mindset of like, I don't need to apologize.
Right.
I'm not going to be the first to apologize. And let me tell you, for weeks I was pissed off at everybody. I was anxious. I was depressed. I wasn't sleeping. And then I was like, why did I think I didn't need to apologize? Because that one turns into 1,000 things.
Right. It's always a ripple effect.
Always.
And, you know, like earlier I was talking about like the path thing. So either you have the path of destruction that you go down. You have the path of, I wouldn't say acceptance, but all right, this happened. I'm going to work through it. I'm not going to let it burden me, affect me. I'm just going to go through it. And that was kind of the path that I was down, right? And then there's the third one of the path of healing. And this is the narrow road. This is the one that we don't go down enough.
It's so hard.
But the best part is all roads can lead to that road.
Yeah.
But it does take the conscious effort to do that and not reliving and diving into that trauma over and over and over and over and over again. I thought for the longest time that I had forgiven everybody because then I had, and my poor husband, he gave me my husband for a reason because he's just so loving and understanding, and I do equate that to his dad. The most level-headed person you will ever meet. I have a very hard, distrust of men in general. And because I had that, and then on my 15th birthday, these two guys, they didn't break in because the door, it was one day I did not lock our front door. And it was broad daylight. I had just come home from school. And it was my birthday. I had my tunes turned up really loud. And it was like the rule, okay, you can go to your friend's house after you get your homework done. So I had my music cranked up. And for the life of me to this day, I still don't know what song was playing when this happened. But I was done. I packed up my bag. And I felt this unsettling feeling that someone is behind me, but I'm thinking it's my brother. So I slowly turn and I see, in my peripheral, there's two people standing there. Oh, I turned back, and then when I turned again is when one of them rushed me and just beat the living crap out of me. I was in a ball, screaming. My window was wide open. And I know, in my head, I'm I'm going to die. This is the day I die. Oh my gosh. God help me, and I'm just screaming. This other guy's yelling at him, get her, whatever. And then out of nowhere, I don't even know how much time passed, but out of nowhere, they got up and they left. And then I'm just left a beaten, bloody, bruised mess. And go and lock the front door. And there was also the day I didn't let Akita in the house. And so, of course, I have this distrust.
Yeah.
And that distrust also leads into making very poor choices in regards to men. And then coming into junior high where the internet was, or high school, and now the internet is a very rampant thing. And going into chat rooms, you didn't know who you were talking to. It wasn't easy to just upload pictures and stuff back then.
And even still, there's lies out there.
Yeah. Thankfully, I was never stupid enough to meet up with somebody by myself.
Yeah.
But, you start creating these really bad situations for yourself. And I got myself into plenty of trouble with just making poor choices, thinking that, if this is all that they want, then whatever. you kind of like go into this other place in your head and you tune out and you just go to this other place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you feel all of this other stuff on top of that. And after that birthday situation, I was forced to go to therapy. But here's the thing, if you're not ready to go, it's not going to work.
No. You're going to find every reason why it shouldn't, and you're not going to do anything.
My first session, I'm sitting there, and my mom and my sister are sitting there with me. I'm like, yeah, you really think I'm going to open up right now? And I've got two other people
spill it all
here?
in front of
Excuse
everybody
me for a second. So I had,
work.
this was me the whole time. Do you think you should be here? No.
I'm fine.
I don't need to be here.
Yeah.
I'm good. Well, what happened? I got beat up. You know, it's
a day like this is what we do every day. Like, we just get beat up.
I think I went 3 times and then I would not. So we just let it go, and everything got worse from there. I made some very poor choices that year. I got caught shoplifting with some friends at Virgin Records in the mall.
Oh.
You're gonna laugh. It was a
was it even a good one?
What was Anna?
It was like
my
VeggieTales.
sister made fun of me for the CD. She was like, over that. I think it was an 18 CD.
Oh no.
And because I just went along with things because, again, my friends were hurt and broken from their situations, and they're like, oh, we're going to do this because we've been stealing. We haven't gotten caught. And so we did get caught, and we just all had to pay a fine. But I remember there were 3 of us and one of my friends. So we're sitting in this like security office, and there's like handcuffs on one of the chairs. They didn't handcuff us, but she sees the handcuffs and she starts flipping out. And
she's like, oh, this is bad.
But like both of like their guard, like people who came to pick them up, like there were no consequences for them. And I remember the worst thing my mom could have ever said to me when she picked me up was, you have lost my trust and it's going to take a long time to earn it back. In my heart sank.
You're like, I know what this means. Yeah.
So guilty and wrong. And I had to pay my mom back every dollar, which understandably so. I think it was like a $500 fine or something like that.
Which is so much when you think about it too.
Well, yeah. And that was what, like 2000?
It's like $1,500 to $2,000 now, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's just, that's money.
They like, nothing happened with them. I was like, ugh.
But I think that's like a very valid point. Like, whatever age you're at, who you hang around is how you are able to not just do life, but like handle when trauma happens. Yeah. Because they're like, as an adult, it's, oh, just drink wine. Like that's a big one. Like I love drinking wine. I don't have a lot of favorite wines, but I have a couple. But my answer isn't go get drunk from wine in my kitchen because I had a hard day. But I know women who do. Yeah. I know women who is like, oh, we're just going to go watch porn. Like it's fine. I'm stressed out. It helps me relax. And it's like, okay, or
go take a hit and just do marijuana. It's legal. It's fine.
There's that. But then it's even stuff like we don't quantify as going down the wrong path is like, oh, okay, I'm just going to eat my feelings away. I'm going to go get the dessert again. I'm not going to take care of my body. I'm going to sleep for 3 days. I'm going to go and blow a bunch of money that I don't need to blow. I'm going to go to Disney. I know this was my thing where I'm just going to go to Disney and eat whatever I want and swipe the card and not care about what is coming out of the account. And then it would be like, shoot, I blew $700 like that, not realizing how fast that was. Yeah. And then going, oh, crap. And it was the people I had around me would be like, well, let's just go to Disney. Let's just go do this. Let's just go that. And that was how they handled the trauma versus being like, okay, let's sit in this. Yeah. Let's talk about it. Are you okay?
Yeah. So some of the best moments I've had as an adult in just finding the right people, right? And a couple good girlfriends. And at this point, I was the only one who had a kid. The 3 of us went and did a girls' weekend. Where did we go first? We were in Vegas. That trip was hilarious. But anyways, because like both their parents have timeshares, so we were able to like use those. And so we stayed at like one of the resorts like off the strip and stuff. And one of the days we just, it might have been just like early evening. We're like, oh, we're just going to hang out and whatnot. And I think we had every intention of, oh, we're going to go out later and just like go see a show or something. And we ended up just staying in the room, and we were just like open and raw with one another.
Those are the best.
You know, when everyone's crying and just taking turns and just listening. And those are your true friendships right there. Those are you have those people who just sit and listen. they know your hurts, they know and everything like that, and they don't collect that information to hurt you with it later. It helps them to understand why maybe you respond in different ways.
Yeah.
And that's why I explain to my son now, I'm like, choose your friends wisely. If you are left feeling like they just took the whole time and you don't really feel good about it afterwards, maybe that's not a good friend. Maybe that's just somebody you play with at school, but
you get to love on, but not your true friend.
Yeah. I'm like, never do we want to then teach our kids, like, well, then shut that kid out, because you don't know what's happening in that kid's life. And you might be the only, like, kindness or friendship or Jesus that they see, right? But you do need to be careful in those situations and set up those healthy boundaries. Ooh, trigger word, healthy boundaries.
Oh, I got ripped on social media for that one.
Yeah. Well, I'm here to tell you, healthy boundaries are there for a reason.
Yeah.
And if we don't set those up, we set ourselves up for failure. And if we don't teach our kids to do that, then it's that cycle again.
Yeah.
Because your kid either becomes the domineering one, who's like, cool, I can just do whatever, or the submissive one like me and becomes the doormat. I actually had a picture hanging up on my wall of a doormat, and it had a different name on it because of the artist who drew it, but I was like, you could easily just put my name on that. And I think the only honest conversation I had with one of my friends was just completely shut me out for about 6 months, and I never knew why. And I think he was just going through his stuff, and then called me randomly one day at like 3 a.m, completely drunk. I went out to my car and I sat in there and I had the most honest conversation I think I ever had in my entire life with him. And I was like, I just want you to understand something right now, because I didn't do anything wrong, so I don't know why, like, you shut me out. I just bits and pieces of what I remember from the conversation, but you have not treated me well. I've showed up for you. You've treated me like a doormat. Like, I'm your sidekick. Like, you always make me the stupid friend in the group. Like in those movies where there's like the churchy friend is always the dumb one, or you know, like all of that stuff. And so I'm like, I'm always made to be that person. I'm not that person anymore, and it's not okay. And I've not liked it. And you know, the dynamic changed very quickly on how he responds to me. But then somebody else got shifted into that position, which sucked. And
yeah, because you would hope that they would receive and be like, oh my God, I need to stop doing this all.
Right.
But that doesn't happen sometimes.
But there's a lot of healing that needs to happen there still.
Yes.
And until he's ready to face it, it's not going to happen. And it breaks my heart because I can see what's happening, but the blinders are still there.
So what is the boundary then for you? Because that has to be different.
Yes. So I am very careful about the time I spend with certain people. So I have a friend group. I'm the only believer in the group. We all have very different views on things. Some things we share the same. And when they go off on rants on stuff, I'm quiet, because I'm like, I'm not going to feed into this right now. And I don't need to be painted into a corner, because that's exactly what's going to happen right now. I do believe that there is a time to speak up and a time to just be quiet.
Dang.
Because holding your tongue is not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not the easy thing either.
No, it's not. And we've gotten into things over text messages, and I hate that. I absolutely hate that. Because I'm like, can we just sit and have an honest conversation face-to-face over this right now? Because we're clearly missing the point.
And you can see your body language. And that is very vulnerable to do that. It is easier. And I am the person who I have a hard time, because I know someone's going to be listening and be like, oh my God, like I can't do in person because I freak out. I never get to say what I want to say.
Right.
That's me. Like in conflict, I shut down. So a therapist told me that I've done this, is write it out and check it off as you go.
There you go.
And I was like, okay, I still use text messages when I'm like, I just want to drop it and be like, okay, now we have to talk about it. That's not good. That's not fair to the other person. And I learned that the hard way this year. And that was something like, I went to a friend and she's like, can we just sit down? She said that. She said, can we stop with the text and just sit down?
Yeah.
And I was like, that scared the living crap out of me, because it left me going, well, what if she doesn't receive it in person?
Yeah.
Because then
you
it's
have
done.
you have to be okay with that, though.
Yes. And that was where
I had to do that with a family member, and it was so like, it was because I was finally like, this conversation is getting us nowhere right now. We need to actually talk about this. So I'm like, I'm stopping this conversation because we're just going to go around in circles. And then we ended up FaceTiming because it was too hard to like get together in person. So we FaceTimed and we talked through a lot of stuff, and our relationship is getting a little bit better. I think there's other things that we need to talk through and stuff, but
yeah.
you know, as we're all healing for different things, we also need to be understanding of that.
There's different responses for everybody, different like trigger points for each person, but it also is, there's two things that you had said that tie into this, where it's, what you have said is over and over again, you're like, when you're having a friendship with someone, it is not about trauma upping, it's not trauma bonding, it's not just taking what they want and moving on, but it's listening to each other's stories and saying, okay, now this is how I can love you better.
Yeah.
And I think that like, most of us don't know how to have a healthy relationship, because what we think healthy relationship is, here, you know my crap, I know your crap, and we're good. We know what to, and we don't say this, but this is what it is we know what to use against each other when there's the conflict, versus it going, okay, I know your stuff, that if I were to start yelling, even just raising my voice, like actually I got quiet because I was like, ooh, I got a little loud. Because what it's doing, I can understand on your side, it's if I'm yelling, your brain might not be holding what I'm trying to tell you. Yeah. And I might actually be sending you into a kind of a shutdown moment. So I want to control my voice and not just be like, I'm just a loud person. Like, no. I want to control it for a second and be like, hey, like, I understand that this could also trigger Emerson if I'm yelling. And I might be having the time of my life. And he's just like, whoa, I'm overstimulated.
You can see it in the body language.
You can. But if I'm not receptive to understanding what your guys like, say, hey, if you guys could be mindful of this, it's going to be like, okay, we're just not going to bring this person around because she doesn't care.
Yes.
That's how it comes across. Yeah. When I'm like, oh, well, I'm just a loud person, because we could do that. And I think that that's what we do is, you said earlier, you know, we don't need to glorify our trauma. And I hear this a lot with people where they're like, well, I just have anxiety. That's just my anxiety speaking. I used to do that all the time. Like, I just have depression, because it felt like at least maybe I was understood, but then it was like my label. Right. And that's the problem, where it was like, if you asked me, someone asked me this in high school, it was one of my friends in high school, best friend at the time. He goes, who's Denisha without color guard? And I was like, and I said bored, very bored. And then I every time something that I bring on, a label I bring on, is like, who am I outside of this? Yeah. And that whisper comes back of like, Denisha, who is that? Like, who are you without the education? Who are you without the titles? Who are you without the Facebook and the Instagram? Who are you without the anxiety? Yeah. Who are you without the label of depression? Yeah. Okay, you don't know? That means you're too far in it. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, shoot.
And we can even do that as moms.
Yes. Yes.
And
guilty.
Who am I outside of mom?
Or wife, or friend, or everything. Like, yeah. 100%.
And I think that's where, especially right now in the world, like identity. You have
to be something, or you're not anything of worth. And that's so not true.
That's where I've really been like shifting my focus and realizing that I'm putting my identity in the wrong thing my entire life. In circumstances, in emotion, in people, and like all these things. And then I'm like, hold on. There's only one identity that I need, and it's my identity in Christ.
But if you don't know who Christ is, you don't know that identity, right. So then you pick up everything else, yes. Which is like a message Kev probably shared. But right. I'm like, just...
And I think it just makes me sad, and I know haters are going to hate, like, I can't believe you're doing religion, whatever.
Oh, nobody cares.
But quite honestly, and you can go down your own rabbit hole. Yeah. Of listening to these people's testimonies, and they talk about all of the brokenness and hurting and the depression and anxieties and all this stuff that they carried for so long, and then they finally got to this point where they were just like, enough is enough. I need truth. All right, God, if you are it, I need you to show up right now. And he always does.
100%.
And in the most crazy ways, like each one of their stories is just beautiful and amazing. And then all of a sudden, it's like all of these things that they had to put their identity in, because the world says you have to have an identity. No, you have one identity, and it's in Christ. And if you don't know him, you're going to just keep seeking after this, that, and the other over and over and over again. And I am still working on my own identity in Christ. And as I'm pushing farther into that, I'm realizing that the fear, the anxiety, the stress, all these things are starting to go away. It's like that picture that Lilo draws a Stitch.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like your badness level.
Your badness level is here.
But I feel like reducing it. Here's all of Anna, and then like all the things that I constantly felt like I was barely keeping my head above water and just like trying to get the breath every day, and then going to sleep but not sleeping, and then it was just like all these things constantly not being able to shut off the brain and over and over and over and over and over again. And then when I finally stopped, because I hit my point, it was like May something of last year. I saw the email where I had to take a mental health day, and I was just at my lowest of low. I was mad at God. I was just like, I don't understand why these certain relationships with friends are not working, because I kept seeking after these people who clearly did not want to invest in a relationship with me. And I kept thinking, well, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Because I'm seeking. I'm pouring out all of me and nothing's getting poured back in. And I'm like, because I'm looking for the wrong picture, first of all. If you're waiting for the world to pour into you, you're going to be waiting for a long time.
There's this video, and I know somebody has seen it, but it's the picture. There was a video of this lady pouring into different cups of like generation to generation.
Yeah, I think it's
and I sat, but it's really cool because it's kind of like, oh my gosh, it was like how trauma gets poured into each one, and it's just dirtiness into the clean cup. Yeah. But then she's like, if you want to stop it, you have to stop it. Mm-hmm. And she was like, and then if you stop it, like you pull out and you get a clean cup, and then cleanness goes forward. But then you said something that my head was like, oh my God. This whole time, it's like trauma. We could pick up the labels of trauma. We could pick up what happened to us and say, this is what I'm worth. But if we're not careful what we pour into people around us and comes after us, someone else can come in and be like, okay, here's the dirt again. And that like we could do that with media. So it doesn't matter, like if we don't find our identity in Christ, it doesn't matter if we're pouring in the positive podcasts. It doesn't matter if we have the positive music going, which is why so many people out there who have invested, like you hear this guy was an atheist, and he like had a church on not atheist. He was atheist, and he had like a church for Satan. And he like tons of members. And he was just like, God, just like, get up, like, let's go. And then now he's like tatted up. He looks like, you're like, he looks rough. Right. And I was just like, what is this going to be about? And then I heard him, and I was like, oh my God, because it's like when God gets you and you get who God is, you don't need to understand all of him, because we won't. No. But if I start looking at the Bible instead of looking at what verses to apply to make me happy, and start looking at the story of what the Bible is it is God's love for us through the cross. Then I'm like, okay, my identity through him is I'm not the sexual abuse I went through. Right. I'm not the trauma that we went through. Yes. We're not the weird kid who grew up and got beat up. We are Anna and Denisha, who were wonderfully and beautifully created through Christ.
We were chosen,
and it wasn't supposed to be like this.
Correct. And I feel like that's the other thing too. Like, everyone is so quick to place the blame on God when everything bad happens, and that's how good the enemy is. Oh, right? Yeah, because he can shift the narrative just enough to deflect.
Yep.
So that way he's like, don't look at me. He's the creator. Like, dude, he could have stopped it if he wanted to. And when I was doing my prayer counseling thing, one of the things that we did was she's like, okay, now forgive God. And I went, what?
What I need what? I know.
I'm not supposed to forgive. He forgives me. I don't forgive him. And that was so hard. And I'm like sobbing. And this is like a hot mess of like just like everything. And I'm just like, okay, because I realized it was like, you have those moments, you're like, where were you? Where were you when this was happening? He was there. But the sin of others just comes at and comes at and comes at and comes at. It's that ripple effect that nobody wants. And we see all this stuff constantly, especially on social media, of like this and that, and like all the heartbreak. And God wants us to feel that heartbreak, because if we feel it, we're not going to, most of the time, we're not going to repeat it.
Right.
Because we don't want that for other people.
Right.
But it's that deflection.
Right.
It's like, you got to point it in the right direction there, because it's clearly not going to go.
No. And I think it's hard, because I know that there are a lot of people who have said, like, you said it in the beginning too, where it's like, well, I experienced hurt from somebody who said that they were a Christian.
Yes.
I did. Like, my dad preached. He was a deacon at a church. He was in the church. People loved him. People went to him to get saved. Like, but God did not sit there and go, well, Denisha, I'm just going to allow this to happen because I have no idea what I'm going to do with this. He allowed it to happen, and he's like, I'm going to... There is a story in the Bible about all the chaos. It's fine. This is part of life. People are walking through. It is mom life, and it's fine. But there's a story in the Bible where there is a man who was born paralyzed, and the disciples are like, Jesus, who did this to him? Did he do it did he sin, and that's why he was paralyzed? Did his parents sin, and that's why he's paralyzed? And Jesus is like, it's neither. But what it is he gets to show God's glory through this healing that he has. If Jesus did not heal him, he would not have ran to a town to say, do you see that I'm walking people who have known I've never been able to do this before? Yeah. So when we get to go, like, when God has like, okay, I have yesed this, not did this. When I have said yes to this, think of Job. Right. Job's whole story, where it was like God said yes to it because he's like, I know my faithful servant. And it wasn't to test Job's faithfulness to God. It was to show the glory of God through Job's story. And then you sit back and you go, okay, Lord, you are going to say yes to this trauma that happens into my life. But you also set me in a place where people pointed me to you. Yes. Yes. So he didn't act like, I didn't go through, like, Denisha without Jesus would have ended up probably murdered. Like, I'm going to say, I would have been kidnapped and murdered. Like, that, like, literally, like, 3 different times that almost happened. Then I would have had more sexual abuse happen to me. I would have been, I would have still been angry. But Denisha going through healing, Denisha learning through people that God is good, that is a very different Denisha today than who I was 5 years ago. Yeah. Because the hardest part wasn't okay, I need to forgive God. It was God is not distant from me. God was there with me and being like, I know that I'm having you walk through this, but there are people that I'm going to ask you to speak to. Yep. That are going to be able to go, you did, and you overcame it. Not, hey, I had it happen and we're never going to talk about it again. It's like, do you know what really helped me was faith and healing together.
So one of the things that Jamie said to me was, it's like eyes closed, going through all this stuff. And we're talking through that. And then she goes, did God need that to happen for you to tell a story? And I said, no. She's like, you're right. He doesn't need any of it, right? Because this is not the way the world was supposed to be.
But pause, because the way I heard that question was God needed it to happen, and then it's like, no,
God he doesn't need it. He does not need our trauma. He does not need the heartbreak of this world to make himself known, but he can use it. There is a difference. He doesn't need it, but he will use it.
And he will not use it to be like, well, for me, it's like if someone, let's give a silly example. Someone sees somebody messing up at work and you're like, oh, don't worry, I'm going to let them keep going down this direction because I will get the promotion. I don't need it, but I want it. Right. That is not what's happening. Right. It's I see that this is happening and I understand the 17 different people affected that this is going to help. It's going to open up this door for understanding for 17 other people that it wouldn't have because of who you, Anna, have connections to that God has placed you in communities of. Yeah. Because I can't go and tell your story. Right. Only you can.
And the other thing that people need to understand too is God is not happy in those situations either. He is hurt with you. He feels it with you. But he's such a good and loving God that gave us free will from the start that we have to remember all of our choices come with consequences, good or bad. Tell my kids this all the time. I was like, there's a consequence for everything. Consequence is not a bad word. It's not.
It's the action that leads to the consequence that makes it bad.
It's either going to be a good or it's going to be a bad. So we can either take what has happened and let God use it for good, or we can let the enemy at us even more than he already has been and feed into it and feed into it and feed into it. So we're so helpless that we start listening to the lies, which I did for so long. I did.
And that's completely normal, but it is our choice to continue to listen to it.
Right. You are either going to hit that rock bottom in the way of, all right, now let's change this and not live in this anymore, or it's going to look real ugly, and real disappointing. And you know, we've had friends within our family who committed suicide, and one of them was my brother's best friend, and it rocked him to the core. And different things have happened, and I straight up asked my brother at one point. I was like, I need to ask you a question. Do you think God's trying to get your attention right now? If anybody knows the story of Jonah, right? And I brought this up last night in our text message, is if God has a purpose on your life, and if he has something that he has called you to do, and we blatantly ignore it, I'm not going to do that. You can run from God all you want. But if he has a plan and a purpose for you, guess what? You're going to do it.
Yeah.
And you're going to sit in that for a while if you have to, in the belly of a fish, until you finally come to your senses that, oh no, I have to do this. Yeah. Because here's the other thing though. When he finally did go, he was still mad because God didn't rain down fire and condemnation on Nineveh. But here's the funny thing I love the story of Jonah because, so my dad's background is Assyrian. The people in Nineveh are Assyrians. Had Jonah not actually gone and completed the task that God had set before him, I would not be sitting here today in the faith of Christ.
That's a whole
And that was how long ago? Thousands of years ago?
Thank you, Jonah.
You know, it's like,
just kidding.
I know you were still mad at that, but guess what? Thank you, because here I sit. And it's one of those things where you just have to find those connections when you're able to actually look back and you're like, okay, this, and this all happened. And that was awful. Awful. And and I think the other misconception is, okay, when you're a Christian, everything's all rainbows and sunshine and everything. No, because in the Bible it says, in this life you will have trouble, but take heart because I have overcome the world. Jesus was ridiculed. He was spit on. Like they beat him to death and put him on a cross. You think we're not going to walk through stuff? We are. We're going to get ridiculed. That's just like he said it right then and there. But how are we going to respond? And I'm like, I am not going to let the trauma from my past destroy my future.
Yeah.
I want to use these things to help educate, to help walk alongside, to help people come out of. So then they can heal, and then they can help others heal, and they can help others heal, and so on and so on. Because that cycle has to stop.
It needs to, and sometimes we don't have family to tap into to be like, oh, okay, we're going to change this in a family. Like when you step out and say like, this abuse happened, this trauma happened to me, this hurt happened, even in your healing journey, you might be like, I don't want to live in my bitterness anymore. Right. I don't want to live in the anxiety and depression like we have as a friend group. I want to go this way into that path of healing. Yep. People will look at you and be like, that's just not what we do. Like we get drunk, we go out and eat, we sit and gossip about people. And I think that's the biggest one, is that a lot of people don't realize that sometimes we just sit around and we're just like, oh, did you hear it? And like, that's a part of it's so, and it feels good.
So bad.
Like, I'm going to call it out. It feels good sometimes when you're like, I knew this thing about this other person that someone else didn't.
It's like,
and
oh, I got the tea.
That is also trauma bonding responding. Yes. And when we have these three routes to go, and it's kind of funny that you bring up Jonah again, because it's like, I always think, I'm like, well, Jonah wasn't happy about him having to go. He ran away. He wasn't running away from his calling. He was running away from what God told him to do, and said, Jonah, you are the only one who can go. Like, I'm choosing to use you to go. Yeah. And you're saying no. And I'm telling you, you're going to go. So the man gets swept into a stinking fish, and the boy still gets up and he's like, I'm angry about it, but I went.
pouting like a toddler on the beach.
How much more would Jonah had seen of God's love if he sat back and said, wow, God, like you love them just enough? Because what he said was, you shouldn't give them another opportunity, Lord.
Yeah.
You should. I think you should spit fire. And I think we do that in our healing journey, is where we, sometimes we're not walking down that destructive road, but what we are is we're walking in anger all the time and being like, Lord, you should have taken that abuser out. Lord, you should have, I've had to deal with this with feelings with my parents and extended family and things like that, where it's like, y'all should have done something.
Yeah.
And it's like, but did they know?
Right.
Yes or no? Doesn't matter.
Right.
Because what happened is something I have to heal from. That doesn't matter. I could get all the answers, and I think that that's what God, like, another trauma moment, is the file from one county led to another file in another county for my situation. And most of it, out of 47 pages, there's like 6 pages that you can see. Wow. That's it. And I was sitting there and I go, like, I just heard, like, Denisha, you're not going to get all the answers. But you have a choice to keep going to healing.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so someone out there needs to hear, like, you could either stick in the, I'm kind of going to healing, I'm kind of finding faith, but I'm still pretty angry. I'm still trying to make my life look perfect, but I'm not really going to dig into community and find the right people.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to stick to doing this because I can get drunk every once in a while, or I can overeat every once in a while. It's not hurting anybody. But you're not getting to live in fullness of enjoying that this part of life is happening and that it leads to heaven. And like when you realize, like, heaven is an extension of earth, not
it's like a million times better.
1,000, a billion, a billion, like a trillion.
Infinitely.
But I think sometimes I've sat on, and that's what actually led to me going to counseling in the last year, was like, I was sitting there going, like, I'm tired of responding in anxiety. I'm tired of having depressive spells. This is not normal, especially when medication is not working. That tells me it's not chemical.
I had postpartum with Amelia. I did not have it with Emerson. I had it really bad with Amelia. And the fact that this was like during COVID, it was toward the end of 2020, but still.
That's worse.
So that just added more to it. But so I kept trying to say, I'm fine. And like, I went to my appointment, Dr. asked, I was like, no, I'm fine. And then later that day I straight up lied to the doctor. Like, I'm not fine. So I did. I called back and I was like,
the doctor's like, I know.
And so they did prescribe me an antidepressant. And so I took it probably for about 6 months. And then I got to this point where it was making it worse.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'll take half of the pill. And then I would just feel like I was like all this anxious, nervous energy, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And I'm like, okay, I need to stop taking this altogether. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then occasionally I would have days where I was just like, I felt like I was like clawing myself from the inside out.
Yeah.
And so I would like take one and it would make it worse. And I was like, okay, this is not the answer.
It's not chemical at this point. It's spiritual. Yeah. It's emotional. There's this moment, and that's where I think that's the third level you were talking about, is getting to that road where it's like, I have to go into healing. Like, but that's why it's so hard, because it's like, I have to be willing to say, like, it's no longer that I'm just anxious and depressed. It's like, there is something rooted so deep that I'm going to have to kind of go in and dig. And it's scary. And it's going to stink. And you're not going to be a nice person. Yeah. But you're going to relearn, like, okay, what is this extra level that's holding me here? And I think that is not talked about in a lot of like communities, even, because people are like, I went to counseling for 6 months and it was great. And it's like, and then you're the one stuck in it for 6 years. But it's like your level of healing is not, it's not deeper, it's different. That I think is so, like, we could get really prideful. We're like, well, I'm just healing deeper. It's like, no. Your healing is way different. There's different levels that you have to go in and explore, that you should actually be really grateful your other friend doesn't.
Exactly. I thank God all the time for any of the people that I know in my life that have not experienced any of the things that I have. And like, when I have shared things, when I'm like, I feel like I've shared this with you before, and like go into it, and they're like, no, you haven't told me about that. I was like, oh, okay, well, anyway, so this happened. And then they're like, what? I'm so sorry. I was like, you have nothing to apologize for. That's the other thing. Like, I know that's like our innate response. And I get the thought behind that. Like, it's heartbreaking. Mm. You don't have to apologize for the trauma they went through because you didn't cause it.
Yeah.
Now, if you were the cause of it, yes, please do apologize because that does have weight. I think the response does need to be turned a little bit to, my heart breaks that you had to go through that.
Yeah.
And I'm here if you want to talk through that or what have you and stuff like that. But it is an automatic response is we want to apologize for that stuff. And you don't have to apologize for something you did not do and you did not initiate.
Yeah.
But that's like our quick auto responses. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And like we throw it out there like it's nothing. Like,
and then we also dismiss a lot, I feel like, too. It's like if someone didn't go through the hard stuff like we did or like as bad as somebody else's, we're just like, oh, you're mad about that? Like, that's what you're spiraling for?
That's the other thing, too. We don't want to dismiss it either.
No.
You want to understand as much as you can to the point that you can, because I also get, like, there's certain things I cannot listen to or watch because it is a trigger. So I used to watch, I was like hardcore into One Tree Hill.
I couldn't get into that after a little bit.
There is an episode where she is attacked in her home. And it was like around the anniversary. It was like the 10-year anniversary of this whole thing that had happened. And I had reached out to a couple of my girlfriends. I was like, hey guys, I kind of know this episode's coming up because we all watched it together. I was like, I would really appreciate it if somebody would watch this with me. And it was kind of like, no, I'm busy, whatever. I was like, okay. So I watched it by myself, which was a very stupid decision on my part because
I'm like, I'm only saying not like, and I'm like,
but it's
like, because I've done that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, that weight that you have.
I know what's going to happen with this, but I'm going to do it anyways. And I'm sobbing and I'm shaking and like all the things. And then I did end up like having a conversation in the car with one of my friends about it. And I was like, I just wanted to let you know, like, I was really hurt by that. Like, I walked through that by myself and I had asked.
Yeah.
And, you know, like we talked through it and all of that. But that dismissing these things or again trying to just like shove it under the rug, I'm like most of the time I'm fine. I've not been a big fan of my birthday since, but like my husband tries to remind me, is like, no, this is a good day. And I think it was Ashley who was like, we need to take your birthday back. And I was
we're needing to make that happen.
But I'm also that person who doesn't like, it's this weird thing of I always wanted to be in the spotlight, and then if it's on me, I want to hide because I feel like I'm an imposter or something like that. Like I should not be the one who's in the spotlight right now.
That's where I'm always like it's a battle. I'm like screaming internally.
So
I'm like,
I get all excited and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to do this thing. And then like it approaches and I'm like,
we're like, this is fun. No, it's not.
No. And I was like, so like planning my 40th and stuff. Like, he's like, yeah, I want to do a party. And then I told Dana, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore because no one's going to show up. And then it's going to be that thing. And then it's going to be another day. And then because there's just all of this stuff that I've let build up on this day. And like, yes, I've had some pretty shit birthdays. But I'm like, we are so quick to focus on the things that go wrong or the negative things, right? That's like the one thing that will like ruin our whole day because somebody said something awful.
Yeah.
And then we're like, but look at all the good stuff that also happened.
Yeah.
Who showed up?
Yeah.
Who poured into you? Who spoke love and truth, or like all that. Yeah. And that's where like I had to take breaks from social media because it will flare anxiety because of that whole like keeping up with the Joneses type thing. And we remember like very rarely do we show the truth of what's happening in our lives. We post all of the happy things like, oh, this is the vacation we went on. Oh, this was the first day of school. Oh, like this and that and the other. And it's like, where's the fire that's happening behind you? Because I know that's also happening right now.
You know, you texted me about it. I saw the video. Where's the post?
I know.
Where's the post? What if we got the post? Well, we're gonna do real. You know, and we do real.
Yeah.
And I think that that's super important. But I think too, like, when you said like you had texted your friends to be like, hey, this is the anniversary, this is what's happening, this is showing this, the way that they should have responded, even if they weren't available that night, is, hey, I am available tomorrow, hold off, let's watch it together.
Yeah.
Because that could have helped a lot because it's like, well, I don't want to miss out because you guys are going to talk about it right after it happens. Because that's usually what happens. Because we were old school TV where
we recorded stuff on
you
VHS.
recorded it on VHS, but if you didn't watch it that night, the people talked about it the next morning. So you were screwed because then everything was ruined.
Because you couldn't stream it.
So, no. And you couldn't, like, it just sucked.
If you didn't have the tape, you're just like, la, la, la.
Yeah. And then you're like, well, that sucked. And there was no reruns. So you had to watch it then.
Or you had to wait like months before they showed it
in the
again.
summer when it was after the season finale. Like you would watch the reruns like 6 to 8 months later.
That's why you had watching parties. Everybody got together to watch
But if you want to show up well, it would have been like, I'm not available tonight, but I'm available tomorrow. Record it. I'll record it so you don't have to get sucked in. But I'm going to be there, or be the friend who's like, I need to be there for my friend tonight.
Yeah,
like, I need to be there right now.
And I don't remember like what was going on and all that. And like I love both of them dearly, and they have been people who have, especially like one was like my best friend, and she shows up all the time. Like she's not a believer, but she always shows up. Yeah, and that's where I'm like we've been friends since kindergarten. Yeah, she used to live like right by me and stuff, and so she shows up. And we've had those honest conversations at least.
But this is where the healing has happened. Yes. Because I think that's where people are like, how do you know if you're healed? Is when you can look at someone and say, that sucked, but I know that wasn't your intent to hurt me. Right. But I'm able to still express that it hurt. Yeah. And then that doesn't happen again. Right. Because it's not like now we have all the other stuff that we can tap into to fix when you're going to watch it. But it's still saying like, I know I can be vulnerable with you and you're not going to attack me in this.
And I think one of the things she brought up too was like she didn't know how to be there for me in it. Right. And I think that kind of ties into like what can you do to help those you love who have struggled and gone through these things. The key thing is to show up.
Just show up.
And you don't have to say anything. Just showing up and letting them know that you are willing to be there with them in that, and however it's going to go is huge. Because I think that's where we get a little lost. It's like, I don't know what to say about this. You don't have to always say something.
And that goes back to Job, where it was like Job's friends were like, I think you did something wrong. And it was like, actually, like God's like, at the end, he's like, guys, you didn't actually do anything wrong. But your job was to be quiet and to sit with him. And it's like, maybe our job is just to show up. And I think that has been when I didn't want to show up for people and I was struggling, showing up, actually, I got so much more out of it than I would have because I just simply showed up. And I was like, wow, I'm glad I showed up for you. And even if I didn't know what to say, I'm glad that we could have this hard thing and I'm there versus being like, hey, how's it going?
And in turn, I always feel so horrible when I cannot show up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'm just like apologizing one way through the other. And I'm just like, I'm so sorry. I know you needed somebody to be there. And like, I couldn't be because life and responsibilities. And so I think that's where we also have to give people grace. Yeah. Like there's going to be legitimate things that are going to keep them from being able to show up in other ways. Yeah. Now we have these wonderful like delivery services and stuff, right? And I've had friends do that. We have
7 days that we could literally like, hey, I can't make that day, but I can go to that day. Yeah. But I think that's where the other extra level of healing is. If you're like, well, no, my friends can't show up. Like if they don't show up on the day, they're not my friend. Right. That's a level of healing that we have to have. And I was there a year ago where I was like, well, F this, like screw you guys. You're not showing up. Yeah. And I did the same thing where I was looking for who wasn't there versus honoring who was there. And being happy with who's there. And then I had to get to that level first to be like, let me just be happy with who's here. Yeah. And if there's nobody, I'm so sorry. Been there, done that. That sucks. Yes. But learn to celebrate you by yourself. And then look at okay, where can I heal from here?
And sometimes the reason why nobody's physically supposed to be there is because God wants you to turn to him. Because he's always there. Sometimes I feel like we put so much weight on the physical person that we forget about the omnipresent being, our creator, our lover, our father in heaven who is always there for us. And sometimes he's just the quiet one in the corner waiting for you to acknowledge that he's there. And that's been a realization for me. And I'm like, you know what, God, you've always been there. Yeah. And I don't think I've said thank you enough for that. Because when I had my last miscarriage, I have 4 angel babies. I have one from 2018, and that one rocked me the hardest because I never thought I would go through that because we're all ignorant in that way. And then we did embryo transfers. So there's 2 from that. And then my last one, which is crazy because it would have been honestly considered the most traumatic one because I actually physically held my baby, but I was by myself when that happened. I was at home by myself and this happened, but I had a different feeling at that point. It was more of a peace. It was this weird peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding, right? Because I was in a better place at that point. I was healed differently. Doesn't mean that I wasn't mad later at God, because that was the one and only time that we ever got pregnant without any kind of intervention whatsoever. Because even Amelia was not long after we had just had the embryo transfer. Yeah. So everything's still rushing through your body. Yeah. So there's that. But that was complete, oh my gosh, I actually, we got pregnant. Oh my gosh. And then I'm not. And I was mad about that, right? Yeah. But I had this peace in that moment. I was like, you know what, though? I got to hold this baby. I didn't get to hold any of the other ones. I got to, speak my piece and stuff at that moment and everything, and go from there. But I feel like sometimes there's a reason why people aren't there. And we need to shift that focus, shift that narrative. And that is hard to do.
God, yeah,
because we are people who are meant for community. God created us to be that way. God created us to have people in our lives and share our experiences, and so that we don't feel alone and all that. But sometimes He needs us to just be okay with just being in His presence.
Well, because that's part of the community that He built us for. That's what our heart longs for. Right. We're meant to be in community, so we're not doing life alone. But our heart yearns for our Father.
Correct.
And that's, I think, the hardest thing that I had to learn through a lot of that was those moments of alone sucked, but it pushed me to being okay, I need to either sit with God and be mad with Him. Why did you allow this? Or what the heck? But those seasons I came out and was I know who my Father is again. I've been able to find who He is again because of that moment that felt like that. Yeah. So that's really good. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I will say, as a parent, whichever side you are on, if you are the one who's gone through it, or your child is the one, heaven forbid, who has gone through it, do not discount what has happened. 100% do not ignore what happened. And don't force anything out of them either. They will talk when they're ready. And you have to allow those conversations to happen naturally. And more than likely, those things are going to come up in the most awkward times. Yeah. Or just you're driving in the car and all of a sudden they're ready to talk about stuff. Or of course, it's been a long day. And then now right at bedtime, we want to start talking about everything because we're in that vulnerable space at that time. Listen. And find ways to meet the need. You're not going to be able to fix it. And that, I think, is the other hard thing. Yeah. We need to understand that we cannot fix everything. But that's what we want to do. We want to fix it. You brought me this problem. I have to fix it for you. Yeah. And what are things that we tell our husbands all the time? I don't need you to fix this. I just need you to listen. And sometimes we have to start the conversation with it that way. Yeah. I just need you to listen right now. This is what's going on. And like I said, thankful for my husband. He is very sweet and understanding and has had to deal with a lot of stuff from my trauma, and that sometimes we still have to talk through it. You can't do that because it triggers me or, whatever. But be willing to listen and understand however it goes. And with the whole counseling thing, yes, it is extremely important and they need to go, but you also can't force it.
And you need to find the right therapist.
Yes. There's not a one-size-fits-all. And if, by the third visit, it's not working, then you find the next one. Yes. And it has nothing to do with that person. It's just there's no meshing there. The personality needs to come together. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thankfully, like for my son right now, like he has a good fit with his therapist and stuff like that. So I'm like, fantastic.
Yeah.
Because I had a really good therapist for a long time, and then she had to move on, and then she had to pass me to somebody else, and we did not connect. There was nothing wrong with her. It just didn't feel cohesive and natural anymore.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I think I'm done.
Yeah.
So
My therapist cusses. It's great. Andy recommended her. He's like, she cusses like a sailor. And I was like, perfect.
We're all real here.
I was like, we're on the same page. And it's nice because it's not over the top, but it is something where I have been in rooms with counselors where I did not mesh.
Right.
And you feel the forcing of that happening. And you cannot do that. To get real, true healing, to dig into it, you're not just like, oh, I'm just paying you to pay you. Like, I'm here because I want to be here. And she's here, or he's here because, we want to be there. It was good. I think that this was great. I do want to pray out just because we talked about a lot of stuff, and I think that normally I would be like, cool, but this was a little bit more opening, I think, and I don't want to leave. So God, we thank you for this opportunity to sit and just talk about everything under the sun that we do hush in a lot of conversations. God, I ask that whoever listens to this, also who is hearing this, that they are protected through you, and that they can run to you first and foremost and find community. God, these are heavy topics that Satan does want to use to try to, first off, prove that you don't exist, but also we were targeted at young ages. That's not a coincidence or an accident. That is something that Satan does, is he targets children because it's easy. And God, I just ask that you protect anyone listening to this right now. God, that you reveal your name to them and put people around them that are safe, that can help them heal, and that they choose that third road to healing, and that they realize they're not too far off from being able to turn right into that road. And God, we love you, and we just thank you for this time. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is great. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments or message, and we will go from there.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.